Hello, everybody, and welcome to the 5th Virtual Programmatic Day from IAB Europe. For the first time, we're actually live streaming the whole event from Verizon Media. So, as I work from Verizon Media, thank you, Verizon Media, for enabling us to do this. I hope everyone enjoyed the lunch that they've had and Integral Ad Science for sponsoring the lunch. This has been an initiative we've been running for a number of years now, and really it's an opportunity for us to come together as an industry, talk about key issues with global leaders, experts from the committee, talking about the issues that are concerning us as we go into the next year. So with this first live audience, we're going to bring some people on stage, but it will also be available afterwards to watch on the IAB Europe YouTube channel. Discussions in today's event are going to cover latest market research trends, drivers and barriers, key growth areas as connected TV, and maybe how programmatic will look in a post-cookie world, as well as significant insights and updates on where GDPR and the IAB Europe Transparency and Consent Framework sit. If you're a virtual attendee, you can submit your question via email to the IAB Europe team, communication@iabeurope.eu. Please also don't forget to tweet during the event using the hashtag IABEUVPD, easy for me to say. And please share any photos if you're dialed into the event and let us know how it's going. So in terms of a really quick intro, we're gonna have Daniel Knapp, the Chief Economist of IAB Europe, come up and take us through some of the key market trends, and then after that we'll be joined on stage by a group of esteemed panelists to talk through some of that research. Over to you, Daniel.
Thank you very much, Simon, and hello. I wanted to quickly give you just a whistle-stop tour of the latest trends and drivers of programmatic. I think I have around 7.5 minutes, so this is really going to be very quick. The presentation has two parts. First, we're going to look at what do the numbers tell us, the market size, and then what do the people in the industry tell us? So what's the perception on those numbers? What's the context in which those numbers are generated? The big question is, of course, what is programmatic? And we've debated this forth and back within our Programmatic Trading Committee. And I think there are as many definitions out there as there are market participants and countries combined. So there's a broad definition here which focuses on just workflow automation, which is extremely broad. That could even include social. And if you're very critical, it could even include search. But is that really programmatic? We're saying there's a second definition. We say much narrower. We're focusing on transaction protocols and say it's everything transacted via the OpenRTB protocol. So the numbers I'm going to show make reference to both of those definitions and split them out so we can see how the market looks for each of those. If we include social in this, the broader definition, we can see we now are at a 16.7 billion market in terms of gross spend. So this is kind of at the SSP level before the SSP pays the publisher in Europe in 2018. We saw, of course, a rapid growth of programmatic from a very infant market in 2013 to this rapid growth, and it corresponds to the overall growth of the industry, which even during weaker growth years has really never been below double digit. In this broad definition, Europe is now programmatic first. We can see the rapid evolution from programmatic being 20% of the market to now being the vast majority of the market. So it's the standard on which the industry transacts. And it's like digital, it's kind of increasingly an unnecessary prefix. It's a taken for granted infrastructure for buying, selling, executing media. There was a significant shift in the market, if you can see, between 2015 and 2016, when Europe became programmatic first, when, including social, the programmatic revenue was actually exceeding the non-programmatic revenue. And this includes display, it includes video, and also increasingly, as we look in here, it includes audio and a bit of digital out-of-home, so across all formats. The remarkable thing is that programmatic has been a major growth engine of the entire market, massive double-digit growth. And this has taken place in an area, in an environment where the non-programmatic bit is actually declining. So a redistribution of spend to programmatic infrastructures taking place in the overall environment of a much more mature digital ad market across many European markets, digital now exceeds 50% of all spend. And while we've seen a market growth of 12 or 11% year on year over the last 5 years, we're forecasting actually a slowing down of this growth to 9% and to 7% by 2023 as the market matures. But within that, more and more goes into programmatic, and we see these transaction mechanisms to continue to grow double-digit for the foreseeable future up to 2023. If we say, right, we want to have a narrower definition, and we really want to exclude social, and we want to see what's transacted over the OpenRTB protocol, which brings us much closer to many of the companies in this room and joining us remotely, we can see the market looks quite different. It's quite different market size. Bear in mind, the overall display ad market in Europe is 28 billion euros. For that, we can see total programmatic here, a much smaller proportion if we exclude social. And if we're including social, it's at this 16.7 billion. So that means that we just passed this inflection point of being programmatic first in 2018 and not 2015 when we include social, as you can see here. The growth is still strong, but we can see social is a bit of a stronger driver than the rest of the market. Now, programmatic has, of course, started as RTB, as remnant inventory, but quickly we've seen that this kind of infrastructure and these modes of transaction are also taking hold of more premium environments, and nothing illustrates this better than the world of video, where we're seeing that video is actually now, since 2018, also programmatic first, so premium inventory. And even broadcasters, of course, if you look at addressable TV solutions and so forth, are putting even more premium inventory on programmatic infrastructures. Video is also 1/4 of all programmatic. And if we look at different regions, we've seen a strong concentration of growth on very few markets historically. In Europe, in particular, the UK and the Netherlands as early mover markets, as test beds, where we had strong demand side driving the development. And markets which are very supply side centric, in particular with premium inventory like Germany, have been slower to adapt, but we've seen the sell side getting on par in terms of evolution with the buy side fairly quickly. And also we've seen that markets have enjoyed a second mover advantage. So if we look at a market by market view, we see markets like Poland, for instance, markets like Germany becoming more mature and being in the kind of European middle ground clustered with many, many other markets. So as best practices, infrastructures, transaction standards, measurement and so forth have been established in some markets, they quickly spill over to others. Of course, there are huge local differences in Europe, depending on the availability of inventory, the concentration of the sell side, and so forth. Now, with those numbers, let's see quickly what do industry practitioners say about programmatic, about the state of the industry, where the industry is good at, and what are areas for improvement, and also what are the hotspots for the future. So at IAB Europe, we asked over 550 people, practitioners across the industry, what they think about programmatic and where this world is going to go. Brand safety is a key issue for many across advertisers, agencies, and publishers. Fraud as well, so an issue that's continuously being tackled to provide safe environments. We're also seeing that, though, a key issue to tackle that, for instance, as TXT and other initiatives, perception is still quite low in the industry, although many publishers now have those lists available. With that, we see, of course, in programmatic a massively complex supply chain of hundreds of different companies, of many, many different intermediaries. And the complexity and the inability to understand what's going on in the middle is an obstacle for some to increase their programmatic ad spend or to see actually how is the spend working. And we're seeing overall, when we look at the development strategies of many ad tech companies, a move towards compressing the supply chain, of bringing the demand, bringing the advertiser and the publisher much closer together than has been the case in the past. And if you think about things like SPO, supply path optimization, and other tools and methods to better understand and unravel and optimize the value chain, this is a huge growth area and a key component in tackling this investment obstacle. Programmatic is, of course, highly technical, but this technology wouldn't work without people. In the initial phase of programmatic, we had concerns, would make people redundant? Not at all. We even need more skilled people to work in the programmatic world, people who understand both the world of media and people who understand the world of data. And this is quite a rare skill. If we think about the business practitioners as the blue team and the engineers as the red team, we need more purple team people who can cross between those worlds to really successfully work in programmatic. There's a shortage of talent. Salaries are quite high in this world, so education is a key component in upping the skills and the talent pool available. We see increasingly also the understanding that a programmatic world is not a do-it-all-yourself and do-it-alone world. We see, for instance, if we look at advertisers, more and more partnerships with other companies across the value chain. There's spend outsourced to a DSP, a trading desk. There's also things outsourced to an agency. But increasingly, we see also something that's going in-house. Well, the question, of course, is this all entirely in-house, or does in-housing not mean that you just work differently with different partners? You take, for instance, consultative approaches or software as a service models with vendors to control more in-house as an advertiser. And that's exactly the case. We see it also when we look at agencies. There's one trend, of course, of controlling as much of the ad tech stack as possible. But there's also still a trend on working, in particular in specialist areas, let's say location, for instance, and others, with external vendors. On the publisher side, we also see collaboration. In particular, the hybrid model is much stronger here, working in alliances with others, for instance. But also publisher in-house teams realize we need to be stronger in programmatic. We need to better understand, analyze what's going on. Growth areas. What's next? We've talked about video for a long time, but increasingly, I hope you can read it in the back and on the screens, we see different areas in programmatic becoming extremely interesting. So overall, we see the area of digital out-of-home across advertisers, agencies, and publishers as incredibly interesting and relevant in an industry that's much more mature than we tend to believe. Digital out-of-home really started to surge already in 2014, 2015, but in the out-of-home industry, not in the digital industry. And programmatic is now the connective tissue, if you will, and that brings all that has already been established, digital screens, measurement, and so forth, into the programmatic world, connecting it with other screens, trading desks, exchanges, and so forth. Audio, massive opportunity as well. Voice, despite the hype that we see, is seen as a smaller opportunity here, probably because measurement and fragmentation are still huge issues to be tackled. AI is mentioned, but that's, of course, a very obscure term. Many people mean many different things with AI. But it just shows that automation is going to be more important, and not just dumb automation, so manual or just straightforward automation, but increasingly smarter automation. So to conclude, we have many different trends in the industry, many different growth areas. Quality is a key issue. Ads TXT needs to be made more popular, in particular buy-side knowledge around it. Talent barriers need to be overcome. Supply chain issues need to be fixed. We're seeing strong interest in new collaboration models. And also we see programmatic moving away from just performance to more brand spend. And all of this, of course, is taking place in a legal environment that's increasingly complex. That's also bringing new solutions and innovations. GDPR can be seen either as a roadblocker or as a source of innovation, of thinking differently about how to measure, address, and quantify audiences. And with that, I want to hand back to Simon, and we're going to dive into the panel to explore these things in more detail. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel. So if I could invite the panelists to stage. We have James Brown, Managing Director, Managing Director, EMEA Rubicon Project. Sorry, James. Andrew Buckman, CEO of Sublime. Simon Baker, who is Head of Programmatic EMEA at Bloomberg. Faye Littlemore, Commercial Director at Outbrain. And Daniel is hopefully already on stage, otherwise something's gone terribly wrong. If anyone is on stage later, please sit down so you get better lit up for the cameras as well. So thanks to Daniel for some really interesting research there. I think if we quickly run down the panel, you do a quick intro of your major areas and focus, and then we'll dive straight into some questions. So Daniel, you can be super brief.
Helicopter view.
Wow.
I head up EMEA at Rubicon Project, so I represent all customers, all revenue, all people in EMEA.
So I run Sublime, which is a programmatic high-impact advertising solution.
I'm the commercial director for Outbrain in Northern Europe, which is heading up the demand side of our native network.
And I look after programmatic in EMEA for Bloomberg Media, and also input into the global strategy.
And I will say, any person on stage in a wool jacket is very brave right now. It's pretty warm up here. So we'll see how they do as we go through the sessions.
It's too late to take it off.
Exactly. Okay, so we see key growth areas outside of maybe more traditional display and video. Audio, connected TV, digital out of home. How do we think programmatic is going to develop in these areas? And I think, James, maybe if I could ask you on your view on out of home and audio as a start point.
I think programmatic will bring the benefits that, those channels that it brings to everything, which is democratized access, better targeting, real-time reporting, analytics, and all of those things. But I think that, and each of those media channels will develop at different stages. They all have their own kind of hurdles or bumps to get over in order to, to make it easy for investment to flow. But I think if there's one that really excites me, it's audio more than any other. And really that's because I think that we're at kind of peak screen time. I think if we think about the amount of time we spend using our phones or in front of screens, I don't feel like there's much more room for growth. Whereas I feel like with audio, there's a real opportunity for a bit more of a greenfield opportunity, if that makes sense, where you're either out for a run or you're in your car, or there's opportunities for advertisers to reach you kind of in a sort of sympathetic contextual environment, which is relatively untapped and less competitive than in front of screens.
And then Andrew, coming to you, what do you think the future of creativity may be as we move into these new areas?
Yeah, so it's very much about how can you really look at the context of the user, not only in terms of what kind of content are they reading, but also what their environment is. So, as to James's point, is how can you get creative about where that particular user is that you wouldn't be targeting with advertising now? Are they running? Are they in their car? But then that's on the audio side, but then also on digital out of home and other aspects. How can you be cleverer in the way that you're actually going to interact with the consumer, and how they're going to then remember the message that you're taking along without being able to interact directly maybe with your site or your traditional marketing materials?
And I think just moving into sort of maybe native as an opportunity, but also thinking about native, how do you see that advancing native?
So it's interesting, you've mentioned sympathy, you've mentioned being memorable, and these are things that we think really power a great native campaign. It's about understanding who your audience is and creating something that has a pull message to bring them in. So we know that audiences prefer discovery to disruption, and I think native really offers an alternative to traditional display. And what programmatic enables is being able to do that in a scalable, efficient way, whilst not losing any of the great data and targeting that you get through a successful native campaign.
And then Simon, how from a publisher perspective do you start to feel about these opportunities?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because I was listening to Daniel when he touched on this. So when you throw the word digital in front of all of the key areas, I think it throws some confusion from the buy side. So like, who owns these budgets? So for digital audio, where does that sit? Connected TV, where's that sitting? Is that money sitting in the traditional TV teams, or is it sitting in the digital teams? Now, selfishly, I think it should sit in the digital teams because that's when we can develop programmatic targeting opportunities. If you look at connected TV, I know you spoke about audio, James, but connected TV is something that's particularly of interest to us. The scale's not there at the moment from a European perspective. So if you look, massive scale in the US, no scale in Europe. Publishers in my world are doing an immense amount of work to kind of get distribution up on Apple TV, on Roku and other platforms. But until the likes of us start producing digital original series, we're not going to get more users, more eyeballs, more inventory. So connected TV is a really area of interest.
And that leads really nicely into my next question, almost as if we'd planned it, which we hadn't. Look, so programmatic video is a clear growth driver and a clear challenge. Particularly in the US, it continues to advance at significant scale. But there are some scale challenges in Europe, okay? So with those around, especially this is for brands looking for brand awareness at scale and their usual dependence towards TV as a method, where we are with potentially consumers starting to see some video blindness in terms of the amount of screen time, the amount of pre-roll video they see. Where do we see maybe developments in video format and video opportunities? I think building from your point around connected TV, Simon, and if anyone would like to have a crack at that, they're more than welcome.
Yeah. Okay. I think, look, video is still the best place for brands to tell great storytelling. I appreciate that this is going out outside of the UK, but I think this week is a classic example. The water cooler moment this week is talking about Edgar, featured in the John Lewis seasonal advert. And in this instance, advertising actually becomes the content. It's no longer something that is disrupting our journey. It's something we're actively seeking. And I think there are some brands that have got some great stories to tell. But in the rise of ad blocking, users have said, enough is enough. So knowing that discovery is preferable to disruption, I think that we're going to see a growth in perhaps more native video formats, click to watch, native outstream. I think that they sit in that perfect intersection between this change in user behavior, but also the technological improvements in our industry as well.
Oh, Andrew?
Yeah, I was just going to say, what we're seeing also is a prevalence of, it's starting to come some kind of overlay formats. So if you start to think a lot more traditional broadcast TV, when you look at sponsorships of TV shows, you'll have either a line or a frame around the start of after an episode break, and advertising break even. And starting to see more of that, more providers who are actually being able to show different ways of showing content without actually interrupting the video than the content the user is trying to see.
And then I also think something like connected TV raises a load of interesting challenges, right? And I think particularly early on exponents of RTB can be guilty of expecting the world to become RTB-like. Mm-hmm. I think there's an interesting question about will connected TV or will connected TV opportunities be RTB? Or will they be more programmatic guaranteed and some of those opportunities? What challenges, Daniel, do you maybe see with also changes to targeting that come with connected TV?
Now, first of all, we have to see that television has been for decades an unrivaled medium for brand awareness and reach, and very, very hard to replicate at that scale and speed in digital. And we often talk about targeting of individual addressability in digital. And we highlight that wastage is a bad thing for TV. But I would go as far and say, hey, there's some, if you think about really long-term brand building, there's some virtue in wastage. If you think about the car brand of building awareness over a long time, building envy, desirability, and so forth. So that power of television will continue. We don't need to over-target everything. And we see that as well if we look at some CPMs of addressable TV solutions. They're incredibly high, and every brand has to think, is it really worth it for me? Now, the opportunity really lies in, for me, thinking about television as more than a brand-building medium, of integrating television deeper into the marketing funnel, attracting new brands, which previously through very high access barriers, production cost, scale costs, and so forth, couldn't afford TV to come into this new kind of total video universe. I think one of the most interesting challenges that we have is who is going to own this opportunity? Is it the broadcasters? Is it smart TV manufacturers who across apps now see what people are consuming? Is it people like who have digital media adapters? Is it an Amazon and so forth? So many different challenges. And the last thing is, which you already mentioned, is inventory. Is there really enough available in Europe? Right now there isn't. And we have to see, where does this inventory come from? And is it premium inventory? And if this inventory isn't going to come, we need to address also the fraud issue, I think, in connected TV, because there's an oversupply. So there's a lot of demand, but there's an undersupply of inventory, and we have to get that balance right to put connected TV, addressable TV, new TV, however you want to call it, convergent TV, onto a path of sustainable growth.
Can I add to that? If you assume that that inventory will come, that supply will come. There's so much movement in the OTT space at the moment around. Will Netflix go to an ad-funded model? The Disneys and getting their stuff aligned. AT&T's acquisition. There's so much movement around there that supply will come. And if you assume that programmatic as a transaction methodology, whether it's programmatic guaranteed or PMPs or RTB or whatever it may be, will become the transaction mechanic. It's not creative then that becomes, and that democratizes access. It's then, the barrier is then for that kind of long tail of advertisers that access provides, having creative services. And that's always been the big barrier for TV as a whole, isn't it? It's very expensive to produce a TV ad. So I think, to your point, who's going to solve that problem? Because I think that's where Google have been so successful in display, isn't it? That long tail access point. Who's going to do that in TV?
And I think that actually also becomes interesting potentially, excuse me, when you look at actually going back to native slightly, but actually the ability for longer tail advertisers to find a way to market and even start to produce some video that could be pushed to those platforms as well on a connected TV opportunity. I don't know if you guys have anything on that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think, I already mentioned things like click to watch and native outstream. Very, very accessible from a budgeting perspective. I think that particularly with the click to watch format that we launched, there was a real home for long form content. So theatrical trailers, tutorials, even, videos as long as 2 minutes that we're running this week for a watch brand. And I think when you think about creatively how much was spent on that, yes, that watch brand did a great job, but we've also got a very cost effective place for other longer tail advertisers to make great stories and still put it in front of premium audiences across our network as well.
Okay, so as we've touched a couple of times on the dreaded fraud word, maybe that's an area we could move to next. And I think I'll open it with a broad question. Anyone is welcome to drive it. We see issues that are hindering investment. Ad fraud has been called, brand safety has been called. What is being done to tackle these? And what are we doing as an industry and then as individual actors within the space? Who would like to go first on that one?
Everyone's looking at me.
Looks like you, Andrew.
I think the biggest thing, which actually was alluded to in Danny's presentation, is ads.txt. I was actually surprised to see there's only 56% of publishers that have got that on set up, because, and I guess it's probably because I'm more in a P&P environment where I work in, as it's something that we really push hard on, because we see that it's by far and away the best way to reassure buyers and DSPs that the inventory that they're buying is legitimate, because for us it's very much a guarantee that the publisher is willing to sell that inventory and willing to sell that inventory to a specific buyer via a specific channel. So we hugely encourage the adoption of that, and we insist on that for anyone that's in the publishers that we work with.
Yeah, so likewise, I was going to say exactly the same. I think that a positive ecosystem is reliant on supply and demand. I think from an Outbrain perspective, we do exactly the same. And there will always be a more cost-effective, I'd hate to use that word, there's going to be cheaper inventory without quality content adjacent to it, of course. But I think, obviously, from our perspective, being able to make sure that our publishers have up-to-date compliant ads.txt is what we can do.
Yeah, and I think just to add from my side, I think kind of maybe a little bit ashamed to say that we don't push it that hard. I think we rely on the platforms to push ads.txt. We're not out. I can't actually remember the last time I pushed a buyer on are they buying from a reputable source? Are they buying from authorized source? So that's kind of shame on us, and I think that's something we need to massively improve on.
I think there's loads going on in the industry. I think you've got stuff that's going on under the umbrella of industry bodies like the IAB. You've got IAB Gold Standards. You've got ads.txt. You've got app-ads.txt. There's P-chain, S-chain. There's so much stuff going on, I think, around cleaning up the supply chain as a whole. There are industry initiatives around transparency. There's stuff that's done by JitWebs. There's AOP initiatives. So there's loads of, to see that kind of end-to-end, end-to-end financial transparency, if you will. So I think there's stuff that's done at a kind of collective level, and then I think there's, there's lots of activity amongst kind of responsible actors. So us as an exchange, we make log level data as available as possible to buyers and sellers, and I think so I think there are the kind of the grown-ups, if you will, in the room are, whether it's under the industry bodies or indeed under their own initiatives, are working really hard at it. So I actually feel quite positive about this.
Yeah, I think there's. I think you made a very important point that you talked about the supply chain and also about fraud issues.
Yeah.
And I don't think we should see combating fraud and analyzing the supply chain as separate things. But these I think we've seen this kind of balkanization of initiatives. And now it's really time to bring them all together. So I think those who can combine an understanding of the supply chain with what are the actors that are actually involved here, in particular from an advertiser perspective or from a supply perspective, those have the best chance to really tackle this issue at scale.
Yeah.
I mean, I would also add, if you look at some of the regulatory pressure that exists around the industry, actually, I think everyone does have a responsibility to be validating their own lists. I think pubsellers.json, so p.json as you refer to JSON, is a really big initiative for exchanges to be declaring who they have the right to sell. And I think there is a lot of work in that. There is a really good question here is, should advertisers need to know So the awareness around publishers is high. I think also it's a percentage of publisher rather than a percentage of traffic. I'm certain from my own crude stats that I would say the majority of traffic we now see is ads.txt enabled. But actually there's still awareness for us as platforms to educate people in the middle. But maybe we don't need to educate the advertiser. Maybe we need to give them the confidence that they don't need to know the initiative, but know that there are enough initiatives underway from these bodies, like Gold Standard.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, most of our major DSP partners will buy. So we're 95% of our display inventory is ads.txt compliant. Most of the major DSPs that we work with will only buy ads.txt compliant inventory. So I must say I was quite surprised by Daniel's presentation that the penetration or awareness was so low. I imagine that some DSPs will be thinking about what the impact of buying ads.txt compliant inventory is in terms of price and therefore performance. But I mean, certainly from our side, anything that we can do to drive awareness of it, we're fully supportive of.
I think just in general awareness as well. I think Simon's answer is actually a pretty good one. I think that there should be enough trust and confidence in the system that advertisers and publishers don't care what we're actually doing to make sure, as long as they're 100% sure that there is no fraud in this, or that we're doing everything we can to make sure there's no fraud in the system. And there's a number of different, as James was saying, the number of different new technologies and actors and standards. The only thing, I think the issue we might have as an industry is there's no there's too many maybe new things going on, and there's not necessarily enough standards that are actually in place. But they will come in time. And there's a number of, we're testing something with which is kind of blockchain related with JIC webs. There's also a couple of others which. I was looking at a company called AminoPay, where they look down all of the supply path and validate every single transaction. So there's a lot more initiatives, which is really encouraging that we could step forward into new standards, which means that the ends of the chain don't actually need to care.
So Andrew's just robbed my blockchain question from the end of the panel. Thanks, Andrew. We're going to ask it anyway. Don't worry. So I think if we move on to some of the other content from Daniel, maybe looking at the growth of in-housing, and I think even you can approach this from where we just left the conversation, right? How do you maintain the necessary level of knowledge that maybe exists in an agency or a platform as you move through in-housing models? And what are the challenges we see with in-housing, and how do they maybe also, as a follow-up, start to impact the way we work between teams, and even the culture of teams we work in? It's a pretty broad question, so we'll go to the first part first, right? What do we see as the challenges and opportunities with in-housing?
So I think one of the major challenges with in-housing any discipline is, first of all, it's acknowledging that it's mature enough in its sector, which is great for programmatic. But secondly, it's ensuring that someone doing that role in such a closed environment has still got the opportunity to develop their knowledge around skills and other channels and buyer types. And I think, credit where it's due to agencies when it comes to trading desks is you work across brands quite often, you work across KPIs, you work across channels, and become very agnostic the way that you look at performance data. So I think the main challenge, if you are working in-house for a major brand, is ensuring that you still are able to educate yourself. And I think the key word for a lot of things we've talked about today is being able to educate yourself outside of your own remit to ensure that you don't stunt your own development. So I think that's probably something that is not as attractive to talent, looking at in-house opportunities. And it's something that definitely marketers direct need to think about when recruiting young talent as well.
I think that's a great call out for all the IABs around Europe and IAB Europe events, actually such as this, genuinely as also that need to keep educated about broader sectors, broader conversations that are going on, make certain we're all keeping ourselves up to date. I wonder, Simon, if for you it throws any new challenges in terms of even who you're trying to sell to, right?
Yeah, I just think to kind of add to what you just said, the in-housing isn't always so easy. And I think people are realising that they don't have the skill sets that they need to kind of deliver on the in-housing. So where are they going to come to recruit from? I reckon probably most of us around this panel. So it then kind of comes on to staff retention and how do we keep people happy, culture within an organisation, and what do we do to make them not look elsewhere? To answer your question, yeah, we're seeing a massive uplift on direct programmatic advertising. What I mean by direct is clients directly. So whether it's coming out of Germany, France, the UK, we have probably like 200% more direct programmatic relationships than we did this time last year.
Yeah.
I think it also gets to a stage when a particular kind of advertising has reached industrialization almost. So back in the dawn of time, I worked in search, and search now is so standardized that it's much easier to in-house because there's not that much variation. About maybe 5 or 6 years ago, I was working for an exchange, and at that time there were almost daily updates to all the different competitors in there. James and I were a competitor at that time, and there was always some new feature or new functionality which the users and the traders had to get to grips with. And I feel that SSPs and exchanges and DSPs are now kind of getting to that stage now where there's less regular updates and less regular new features, where you can actually rely on people to have several months or years of experience in using a platform and be able to hire them into either a publisher or into an advertiser and actually run that themselves. Where an agency really steps up is actually introducing brands to new concepts. So trafficking a IAB standard ad is way different to trafficking a digital out-of-home ad. And you can't really in-house that kind of stuff today, and it's going to have to wait months or years before that actually becomes possible.
And on top of talent, there's also the cost issue. It might make sense if you want to go, if you see in-housing as a spectrum, if you're going to fully in-house and not just own your DSP contracts, you need to be an always-on advertiser for this to pay off, because you have constant staff costs. If you have the license agreements with the technologies, you have to pay all that stuff, irrespective of whether you're advertising or not. So these are very, very high fixed costs. I see a lot of the in-housing thing really about reconfiguring the relationship between the advertiser and the agency, and not really taking things away. And where an agency really shines is of course connecting what's being done in programmatic with other media channels, with a broader media plan. I do not see advertisers themselves who have other objectives than just performance, just customer acquisition and so forth, to really think, how does my programmatic strategy fit into my TV, into my radio, into out of home? So the planning component and the kind of orchestration component is going to become much more important for an agency than it was before certain things could be in-housed.
I agree. I think you've got to be really clear about what the objective is, because if your objective is simply transparency, then negotiate all of your contracts. Bring those contracts into-house and outsource all the kind of heavy lifting to the agency people. And I agree with you. I think as a former agency person, I think the value of having people that work across multiple advertisers, they're not sharing data, but the learning that those people get from working on, a brand advertiser and a performance advertiser in different sectors has a massive positive influence on the work that they do on your specific brand. So, personally, I would go for the hybrid model, would be my view.
All I was going to add was it's hugely important, obviously, that we've talked about education about certain different buyer types, different KPIs, but also channels. And I think as a native channel, often being bought by a display team or a team that's trading display, the biggest frustration for us is when people try to buy us like display. And I think I listened to the programmatic native session in the H1 of this day earlier this year, and Clementina, if she's in the room, made it really simple, which is if you're going to measure the success of native, engagement metrics are key. So if you're trying to buy something like display, and yet it's a platform and an inventory that has been built from the ground up for engagement, in the wrong hands, that campaign doesn't look very, very good. It's really important. I think that it's about a mix of channels as well.
So, because we're a very clever panel, I think actually we covered a lot of points in that. But one of the main things I would take out of that whole discussion is that there isn't one answer. There clearly isn't one answer, and actually is a specific brand by brand, advertiser by advertiser consideration. Be that the cost, the training, the cross activity, how frequently you're on, who you need to engage with, how broad your target audience is. And I think sometimes as an industry, we maybe need to step away from over focusing on the broad category at the top and actually drive into what does it mean for this brand? How can they be helped? How can we sell? I always think a lot of those in-houses are actually hybrid models by default. And I think it's just about how they view themselves as acting in that relationship versus the relationship itself. So we're starting to get a little bit close for time. I'm just going to do a quick time check. Yeah, we're okay. We've got a couple of things left, but we're going to move on to 2020 and beyond, and the next 12 months. So we'll start with the negative question. Everyone gets a go. What are the challenges and opportunities facing the industry in the next 12 months? But there is a positive excitement question to follow. Simon, over to you.
Love a bit of negativity.
Yes.
So I'm probably going to do the obvious one. So GDPR going into 2020 is going to be more of a problem. Just to narrow that down, from my perspective or from a publisher perspective, I think there's one thing in particular to keep our eye on. That's this default opt-in versus default opt-out position. I think there's some real implications around which method you're choosing. We know there's some fines coming up. We know the ICO are involved. That's a big area for us to watch. CCPA, which is the 1st of January, is going to bring its own challenges. I think keeping an eye on what Google are doing, and TCF 2.0 from a publisher perspective, making sure that we are compliant with what's going on. That's my negative list.
All right, so you can't take the whole panel.
No, I think that would happen. Whoever went first.
Go on, Faye, have a go next.
What he said, no, I'm kidding. So I think, look, privacy continued. I don't think there's much more to add there. I think that obviously the whole supply chain, as we've already talked about, needs to be part of that ongoing. I know there's another session dedicated to cookie depletion, so I'm not going to go into that in too much detail. I think one of the interesting things that we're going to be doing with data next year is working more closely with marketers who are bringing their first-party data to the table. And I think this will translate very well for us as a native channel. We produce a lot of pull messaging versus push messaging. We encourage our marketers to think about who their audience is, put their own brand agenda to one side, and really think about how they can create messaging that has empathy, that's going to resonate. So I think that the data challenge is going to change, but I think the opportunities for data-driven insights and creative is really interesting.
Andrew.
Not a lot left, is there?
Oh, there's plenty left, man. There's plenty left.
It's not going to be such a...
Daniel's the one who's got to worry about what's
exactly,
left.
yes. That's right, I'll leave Brexit for Daniel. So I think really just actually touching on both of those, the general confusion in the early part of next year over what are we going to do about the cookie, I think is the main challenge that we've got next year. So, and it's interesting to see different actors who are taking different steps in that direction, and I'd love to see an evolution towards much more quality-based storytelling that isn't necessarily dependent on exactly which model of BMW a particular user saw, but really about the context that they're in, the device that they're using, their stage in a story, and their interaction with a brand, and the actual way of being able to share that information just without one pixel on a computer. So there's both a challenge and an opportunity, I think, going forward. But I think it's to start with a much more contextual-based advertising going into long-based storytelling.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with all my panelists. For me, I think the immediacy of the identity question, I think, is my biggest concern at the moment. And I think, it's well documented. All the browsers are moving, are deciding what they want to do around cookies. But I think there is for those of us that operate in the independent web, it's critical that we all kind of coalesce around these unified IDs. We at Rubicon support Trade Desk and Live Intent and Digitrust and LiveRamp and all of these different initiatives. But I think because we don't believe just one will win out, but I think ultimately we believe that identity should be a community-based asset. I think that's our preference. It should be owned by something like a Apriba.org or an open source community. But for me, I think the immediacy of the cookie being under threat, I think, is a big one that we want to focus on.
It's a pretty big, scary one. Over to you, Daniel.
Yeah, of course. There is the Brexit one, but I think nowhere in Europe do you have such a diverse talent base as in London. So I think that will, for the time being, going to mitigate the Brexit effects. I think one thing that I'm skeptical about is actually that blockchain is going to swoop in like a phoenix or some kind of savior and solve all these transparency, all the fraud, all the supply chain issues. We have a tendency to think about technology as a kind of magic wand that fixes things. And I don't think blockchain does that. We need to move more towards solution-centric things or problem-centric approaches and not technology-centric approaches. And I think overall, whereas all these challenges are actually right, I think the fundamental challenge of the industry is that we're very hype-driven. And as soon as the half-life of a topic on a panel has expired, the hard work on it needs to continue. And we have the tendency to, when we don't talk about things anymore, not to work on those things anymore, so that many solutions remain half-baked. And we have to find a way of doing the hard and unsexy work of implementation without it creating some kind of buzz or external appreciation. I think that's the thing that we all have to do together.
Yeah, I think that's super interesting. I think blockchain may well have a role, but I think James spoke to, and I think it's true for most people. Most people have moved a long way on transparency already. So you're going to get to what blockchain would deliver almost by default without a blockchain solution in place. Whether that needs to be used to architect it still may be the case in some use cases. So our final question, I think, in terms of time, it's actually two. What are you most excited about professionally for 2020? And what is Father Christmas bringing you? And no one knew about the Father Christmas question. So we're going to start. We're going to go back down the panel this time. So over to you, Daniel.
I think one of the most exciting things for me is now that the programmatic infrastructure is in place, what cool new things can we do on top of it? How can we connect creative and programmatic? And I think what you mentioned with TV is a great example also on audio. We know inventory is fragmented. Podcasters, for instance, don't have the ability to transact programmatic directly. So if you have a company that combines, let's say, a creative suite and programmatic execution, that's going to be fantastic news. I think that's going to be a big new exciting trend we're going to see. And also outcome-based. I mean, we can talk about trends and formats all day long, but buyer expectations or advertiser expectations are changing. And I think one great opportunity is to use programmatic less for just media KPIs and work more and more on business outcome KPIs. So I think smart companies will see a lot of growth on the service layer that goes beyond buying and do kind of more interesting stuff. Father Christmas, I can dodge that question because we only have Christmas Eve in Germany, so there's going to be some.
Still get presents.
Some things. Okay, I'm going to get socks and a pyjama from my mom.
Yes.
Classic.
The thing I'm excited about next year professionally is I think that is the amount of momentum around things like prebid.org, like the open source community. I think that that gives me a great deal of cheer. I think that the reason why Googles and Facebooks and Amazons of this world have done so well is that they made it really easy to invest into their businesses. And I think for the kind of independent web, we've always been fragmented and we've had different standards and we've frankly made it quite tricky. So I think having a open source community which we can all kind of coalesce around, having unified standards around things like header bidding or video programmatic guaranteed, I think is a really positive thing. There are about 15 companies that are now a member of prebid.org, all of whom are contributing towards kind of the open source kind of community code. So I think, that momentum and that kind of standardization across all of those different areas kind of, I think is a really good thing. And I think the fact that we're sort of, mature enough for us all to work together and collaborate for, sounds a bit, the greater good, if you will, but I think it genuinely is a really positive thing, so that fills me with cheer. I would love some really nice, if I'm on the good list, obviously, I would love some golf-related equipment, but I fear I might be in Daniel's camp and end up with some socks and some pyjamas.
We might strike everyone getting socks here. Andrew.
Yeah, I got socks last year, actually, so I'm hoping I've not used them all. I think professionally what I'm really looking forward to is the development of this kind of more of a movement towards, trying to use another word from this, but it's towards mindfulness. What I'm seeing a lot more amongst the people that I work with in the industry in general is a lot more openness to people's mental health, to how people work together, how people feel about working in the stressful environment that we work in, people's attitude towards alcohol, towards to just the general media lifestyle. And I've seen this year, I've seen that coming on in leaps and bounds. People being way more open than they used to be about issues they're facing and problems they're going through. And particularly as this time, as we're going into Christmas, then sort of people feel that more. So I'm looking forward to seeing that develop. And then I could cheat and say for my Christmas present, I'll be getting world peace, obviously. But it'll probably be socks, and maybe I've dropped a few hints for a mountain bike, but we'll see.
Okay. I'm going to start off with the Christmas question, first of all. I'm doing a 16-person family Secret Santa. So I'm really confident that in the true style of Native, they'll have thought about me, they'll have thought about what I'd like to discover, and they will have bought something accordingly.
Socks.
Probably not socks and pajamas. And then what I'm excited about for next year is probably some of the things we've touched upon already, but actually understanding that users' behaviors and users' perceptions of formats and environments has changed. So I'm excited to see, obviously, the growth of us as Native and some pure Native products. But yeah, I think I'm just looking forward to seeing, advertisers and media owners and suppliers actually take on board that feedback and see some great advertising in the right places next year.
Thank you, Simon.
Cool. First off, I think Andrew's answer was a brilliant answer. But on top of that, I think I've seen some really good work in 100% viewable, biddable marketplaces. And sadly, that really interests me. And I think as a publisher, we're always looking for unique demands and unique opportunities. So I'm not going to name drop the companies, but there's a lot of opportunity that we're working with next year for these companies where we can set up PMP deals that are 100% viewable, which we've not been able to do. So that excites me. My Christmas present's really sad. So I'm big into fishing, and I'm getting 3 new bite alarms, 3 new Delkin bite alarms, and I can't wait.
It's a proper present. That's an excellent present, man.
Hang on, we need to turn that around. Simon, what are you getting for Christmas?
Yeah.
Definitely whiskey after this panel. Look, I agree. I think the maturity we've seen through the landscape is actually the reason for optimism, be that professionally when it comes to mindfulness and those areas, or be it collaboration in pre-bid, or be it maturity in the industry. So I'm really optimistic about next year. I also think we'll hear more about TCF 2.0. I think that's critical for all of us. So Q1 is going to be very significant. And with that, I don't know what my kids will get me, but it definitely won't be something I've asked for. Guaranteed. With that, I'd like to thank the panelists. If we could do a quick round of applause. And then I would like to invite Matt to the stage, who's going to host our next panel. We're going to do a little bit of a panel shuffle over. And I've now clicked the slide forward.
Hello. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Matthew Isdal. I am the Head of Performance at Teeds. We're going to be talking about demystifying attribution in the programmatic area, quite broad, but also a very hot topic and very interesting indeed. So before we begin, I'd like to invite the following panelist, Clementina Piazza, Programmatic Director, EMEA from Integral Ad Science, Oliver Gertz, Managing Director, Interaction, EMEA Mediacom. I think I'll just sit here, so if you guys... Ionut Muntinu, Education Project Manager from the IAB, Romania. And Lucia Mastromora, Vice President, Global Head of Agency and Partner Business at Adform. So I think before we kind of kick off, it'd be great to get an introduction from each of you. Talk about your name, introduce yourself, your role, and some of the key focus areas in the industry that you cover. Starting from my left.
Kept the order right. So, hi everyone, I'm Clementina Piazza. I'm Programmatic Director for EMEA at Integral Ad Science. What does that actually mean? I work with our platform partners as much as our buyers to ensure that everything that we put to market actually makes sense and is easily accessible.
Hello, Oliver Gertz at Mediacom, Managing Director Digital EMEA. So I work with our markets to develop our product, our solutions, and I also work with some of our global advertisers. And main focus is how do we use programmatic to connect better to consumers.
Well, we'll start with a name. So Ionut is the name. So that's how you pronounce my name. No worries. No worries. It's hard. So I've been working for the last 15 years in the performance marketing industry. I founded an agency, and we work a lot in behind the walled gardens. So that is a lot of my expertise over there, but also with helping human capital actually grow in the digital marketing environment. And I think coming from emerging market like Eastern Europe, like Romania, I can give you some insights on how that goes.
Hi, Lucia Mastromauro. I work at Adform. I look after our portfolio of clients globally that includes global agencies as well as consultancies. My background is Google. I did the same job at Google before for the UK, and before that I was an advertiser. I was at eBay, and I looked after the EMEA region for interactive marketing.
Excellent. So in terms of kicking off, I think it's first like trying to give a top-line overview on attribution. So it is to very much better understand what's going on, what levers to pull in order to make effective decisions around where to allocate spend and drive better performance. But it does very much often comprise a multitude of different touch points to consider. And in terms of the opinion on what multitude of touch points to consider varies between clients from my experience. Kicking us off, start with Clem. What are the key KPIs that should be considered for attribution in programmatic from your perspective?
So, great question. I don't think we've got like, an hour or a week. What I mean by that is that, from previous experience, right, there's a lot of technicalities that we end up getting into when attribution comes to the table. And that's probably one of the reasons why attribution, we feel very happy about being in this panel, but we've been talking about attribution for the past probably 10 years, if not more. So the question about KPIs, really, I don't want to give a political question, but simply speaking, it depends. You need, our previous panel made some excellent points around, bringing it back to outcomes. If you want to put it even more pragmatically, any business out there, or whatever size they have an ultimate objective of putting out there a service, a product, pushing something. So anything you put in place, obviously your marketing included, no matter which channels is that you're using, have to be brought back to how much it's contributing to allowing you to sell more of that service or sell more of that product that you're in market for. So, and that's the challenge. The reason why we've been speaking for 10 years around attribution or even more is that, it's quite, even if as a business, you've got quite clear what are your objectives, right? As a business, it's kind of bringing it back to all the activities that you're putting in place to drive more of that. So, which, is another way of saying KPI. So if I know I want to sell more t-shirts, how do I make sure to track, whatever is contributing to make me sell more or is not contributing? How do I bring it back to the activities I've got in place, right, to push that? And that's the challenge because, and we've seen the downfalls of it. I don't want to go ahead in the whole panel altogether, but yeah, I'll shut up for now, but yeah.
No, I think really what it does is highlight there's a big broad area to talk about, and it is very much true that we do really have 20 minutes and then 10 minutes of questions, so we won't be here for too long. But Jonut, I know that you have something, some opinions on this.
In a nutshell, I'd say return on ad spend and return on investment. So basically, this is what we're looking when we're looking at attribution. We're looking at what brings value to us. So yes, it's of course there's a lot of ways to look at this, but I think although we're looking at programmatic and that part of programmatic, which is outside Google and Facebook and Amazon, I think that we have Google is helping a lot understand how data-driven attribution modeling works. So is basically is helping the newcomers that we are going to use in a way just to get a specialist for us in later. So I think if we look at the way this changes and data-driven attribution modeling is popularized, more popular and becoming more popular, I think that's that's what we have to look as KPIs. I think KPIs are all over that, but in a nutshell, I think return on ad spend and return on investment.
Yeah, and I think it's definitely safe to say that having that holistic overview of all the data points and having the relevant platform to be able to understand them and kind of interpret them to drive active decisions is absolutely key. So with that in mind, and now that we've highlighted some of the KPIs to consider, ultimately, what is the best way to directly measure these in programmatic based on your experience? I'm going to kick off with Oliver.
Yeah, so we are, as Mediacom, responsible for all of our clients' media investment. And I think we look at it at 3 stages. So the first question is cross-channel, on and offline, short-term and long-term. Usually, marketing mix models are the tool that we use. Then within digital, the multi-touch attribution, we know last touch, last click is wrong. So going into data-driven attribution is the right thing to do, with some of the challenges when we talk about walled gardens, I guess later. And then the third layer, and I think that's very interesting in the programmatic context, it's not only about insight, it's about how quickly can we action on that data. And there are some really cool developments now where we can take attributed data and merge it back into the bidding algorithm to optimize media in real time. Yes, exactly. And I think that bidding algorithm is very much selective based on, we mentioned the word walled gardens, and we will very much come around to that. Lucia, based on your experience and your role over at Adform and your experience in Google, in terms of actually directly measuring attribution and activating it in programmatic, what's your standpoint there?
I think there are different layers, right? There is the basic layer that you can activate from using one holistic, simple solution. Then there are more complex layers when you start layering in more channels and more tools. If you're only using Google, it's simple, press a button, it's a bit vanilla. It's not going to spit out very complex models for you, but it self-optimizes and drives the spend towards Google, which is, I mean, can't blame them. But having worked on the advertiser side, managing hundreds of millions in budget, I've seen a world where it's very important to optimize to the nth degree, and 1% makes a big difference to your budget. And there are a world of different players out there trying to prove that their activity is the best for the advertiser. But from their point of view and with the KPIs and with the data they're giving you, it is. But I think it's the onus of the advertiser and the agency to make sure that they are really measuring across everybody to see which activity is actually incremental to their activity versus somebody just trying to get their last click or that last impression, or showing up a lot in the process but not necessarily driving the incremental value. So that there are ways to do it technically outside of the walled garden. It takes a little bit of work, but then you move into a more sophisticated setup.
Can I just add one, to Lucia's point? I just wanted to share this experience. I come from DSP world as well. And on a day-to-day basis, I cannot count. I mean, I was there either trading or helping out traders. And I kid you not, and that wasn't long ago, 80% of my time was spent, instead of doing optimization or clever optimization, kind of justifying what I was bringing to the table in terms of data in a one-dimensional way. So, and even if you try to say, hey, but are you looking at it in a more holistic way? What are the things, how many DSPs have you got on the plan? How's the spend distributed? You don't have to tell me how much you're spending on other DSPs. Just tell me, if there's one that has the lion's share, and what's your attribution model? And those were taboo it was taboo territory. It was still treated as, you're kind of making me waste time here, because we're still, although last touch and first touch and, we can go on, many people do believe that that's not really comprehensive and not useful in the mid or long run. It's still the most adopted way, because it, don't break what's not broken.
If I can offer another example. I've been in a case where a partner would tell us that their activity on a post-click basis was driving over 500% performance. And this is $1 million spend a month, right? So a lot of money. And I inherited that relationship, and I'm like, these guys are cherry picking. They're cherry picking our most engaged users that come back all the time anyhow. So we had to build in a very complex model which measured every impression by user. We had to sync their users with our users to actually be able to see what they were doing and to be able to prove that. And at the end of all the analysis and a lot of work, we saw that they were driving actually minus 90% incremental revenue. So to $1 million that I was spending, maybe 100,000 came back directly correlated to their activity. So it sound when I love attribution is a very kind of something a dear thing to me, I would say. I geek out on it a little bit, but where I'm seeing the industry going is attribution has been simplified, which seems that it's just fine, and it self-perpetuates, everything is okay, performance is there. But if you look under the hood, I'm certain that a lot of advertisers' budgets are being wasted because the algorithm's just self-optimizing in a kind of smaller pool rather than truly being able to look at the granular level across all the players that an advertiser is using.
And I think that's a really good point, because from my experience and working with clients as well, there are still many, many people that are adopting that last touch. And I know we are very much talking around that data-driven attribution, being able to take all of the data, make the best informed decisions and look at it to the nth degree. But not everybody does that. And ultimately there are obstacles with advertisers and clients and even in agencies which mean that they can't adopt that sophisticated form of measurement. I know the work that you do in terms of educating and actually from a kind of personnel perspective and growth. What do you think the obstacles are with particular advertisers in terms of why they're not adopting this infrastructure and running more effective measurement?
Thank you for the question. Well, first of all, we have to understand the context I'm coming from. So we're talking of a 100 million euro market a year. We're talking at a programmatic budget of 10 million euros per year, even though it's a 25% growth and 14% growth year over year, which is incredible, is more than the average of European media budget, but it's a small market. So for this small market, imagine how granular the budgets of the clients is. So there's a lot of clients. So for example, my agency holds 100 clients in portfolio, and we barely spend like 5 million euros per year. So for those clients, which some of them can become the new unicorns like UiPath. So maybe some of you know about UiPath, right? Is one of the unicorns that is coming from Romania. And I'm not saying that all the but I'm not saying that all the Romanian SMBs are going to become UiPath. But I'm just saying that they're very granular, and because this is granular, they can, in a way, it's tough for them first to understand the complexity, and it's not popular. Google and Facebook is popular, and because of the budget that is in a way limited, they can, it's enough. Well, it won't be enough in time, but it's enough for them. So there is a lot of opportunity in growing the people that Google and Facebook is already growing, in understanding how complex all the programmatic world is. So then maybe we can, if we help the specialists, maybe we can get them to be more closer to real-time bidding. I'm not talking about the other forms of programmatic, because I don't think that helps. Because if that's direct buying, then it's not helping the granular SMBs.
Yeah. And Oliver, I mean, in terms of your role coming from an agency perspective, you talked about like the DDA, like data-driven attribution. Obviously, there's cost and resource required behind that. What's your interpretation in terms of the adoption of attribution, and what are the common obstacles you've faced in terms of your role with advertisers?
Yeah, I think the advertising industry, we still have a lot of people that have lived in this old world, so all about big ideas. And then there's this data-driven world in parallel, and it's much easier to talk about it than to do it. In the end, it's about investment and priority. So are you willing to invest a certain part of your budget into measurement? And then there are some quick wins. So data-driven attribution within the ad-served world is quite easy. The walled gardens have their own solutions, so they're also quite easy. Where it gets harder is if you bring it together, try to build a holistic understanding. But my frustration is that this is not the most sexy part, and a lot of advertisers don't see that they should invest into this. And it's people. It's people using technology. So it's not really a lack of technology. It's much more lack of people and knowledge.
Yeah. And I think that is very much a common theme that's come through already today, is that there's definitely a need and a demand to invest in resource and the people that have the capabilities to basically invest in this skill set so they can do this kind of heavy lifting for clients, especially if they're trying to look at alternatives to in-housing as well. So going ahead, I think I was quite interested. That was a great talk, by the way, on the panel and the future trends. I think if we're looking ahead to 2020, it's definitely going to be a very much interesting year. We're talking about like new markets, new channels in terms of audio, connected TV. How do you envisage this fitting in terms of the overall kind of economy and measurement perspective next year? Do you think it has a part to play? How do you think that will be measured? It's not a very easy question, and it is quite broad, but I'll open that to the floor.
The one thing, to Oliver's point of bringing it back to practical, right, is let's learn from what we've done so far. The question stays the same. If the overall question stayed the same around, hey, how A relates to B, or how A doing something relates to driving more of what my business is in market for. I think a lot of it, without getting into the infrastructures that you need and, the competencies and whatnot, starts from really asking the right questions. Like, you don't have to build a city. You start from, building a building. So start, and it's so important in view of like what's going to happen next year around, privacy, like all that's coming in on that front, because, it's on the advertiser hand to really, like, as an advertiser, you've got ownership of your kind of, your user base data. And that's becoming, more and more, has become already more and more stringent. So, at all different layers that you're operating in, you are, at the end of the day, the owner of that very important foundational part. And you need to, I don't think that you need to invest in that, whatever, without thinking of the big, massive picture of getting everything that you're investing in, together in one go, right. But, first of all, understanding what you've got at hand. Have you got, a marketing intelligence platform? Yes or no? I hope you do. It's kind of, but anyhow. And then, work with in-housing or not. We've seen it's a partnership in most cases. So understanding what you bring to the table as an advertiser, who you're working with is bringing to the table. So from an agency standpoint, in terms of like expertise and knowledge, and leverage all of these to start asking questions. And no question is a stupid question.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I'm very proud of my Romanian peers, because we have the best internet in the world, right? So it works like that because we're very good early adopters. So I'd say, yeah, we will definitely see a little bit of programmatic out of home on the Romanian streets. I know there are a lot of projects trying to track eye movement and what it means out of home, and I think I think that will happen. I don't know how much of that will happen. I mean, in terms of money and budgets, but definitely it will kick off over there something.
So for 2020, so much to unpack a little bit and bring back to attribution. So Google has done us a big favor, right? They have removed the user ID from their master data, which means is you can put data on them, they can self-optimize for their own purpose, which, I mean, I don't blame them again. But if you're trying to use more than one DSP or something else in combination to DBM, DV360, that piece lives in isolation. Now, for us, Adform is a full stack buy and sell side. So we have the ad server, we have the DSP sitting on top of the ad server, and we have a DMP in the middle there, which is built in one tag. So for us, what we've been doing with agencies and also working with consultancies to facilitate both from an attribution perspective as well as kind of a bridging that divide that has been created between Google in regards to that walled garden is that we have been we have repurposed our ad server for a light kind of solution where agencies can take just that light solution, we call it advanced tracking. They can piggyback that on DCM. So if they are running other DSPs, they have the attribution data as well as the audience data being bridged from that front. So they can activate their other DSP activity without being blind to what's happening within the both reservation and programmatic bits that are happening on Google. So anybody in the kind of attribution front that has seen the solution has been very excited. It helps our DSP as well, obviously, because our DSP then doesn't optimize itself in a blind way. It also helps businesses that are looking at optimizing their audience not to be kind of fully blind and have everything just live in a walled garden and not be able to optimize who their users and customers are in a more sophisticated way. So for us, it's been a little bit of a blessing in disguise. This has happened in EMEA since GDPR, but Google is extending it globally on January 1st. So everybody in the US is very excited about our solution, which is great. But beyond that piece, I think on the attribution front, where we are really excited is just to be able to be that bridge to help, third parties or the advertisers themselves, so the agencies have access to the master data that they need to understand what's happening. If you're not understanding what's happening cross-platform, you're really shooting blind because one might be getting in the way and you're not even tracking that.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of independent ad tech because I think you should not let measurement be done by the media vendor. And I think as an industry, we have two tasks. The first one is simplification. And I think because we're so techy, we often get hung up on all the cool stuff we can do, like IAS reports hundreds of metrics. That confuses clients. So I think the main task that we have to do is going back to the key decision makers and be able to explain on one page, how do we measure your marketing investment and how can we show you that we're improving your return on investment? Then that should hopefully free up also the willingness to invest into that. And then we come into all these technical, very complex discussion to say, what is the best possible way of doing it? And that will be a continuous journey. I'm not so worried about the sophistication of solutions. I'm worried about losing the key marketing decision makers with too much technical jargon and complexity. And we have to always bring it back to the very simple question, what am I getting back for the money I'm investing? If we can answer that question, we get buy-in, and then we can get better and better in digging deeper and getting more precise in answering it.
And that kind of leads me into my closing statement, because all of you kind of touched on your opinions throughout that. Just in the sake of time, I think we'll kind of wrap it up here. But in terms of closing statements, I think if you could give me a brief or more detailed version in terms of what is your interpretation of good attribution and best practice in today's programmatic world. And that is quite broad, and you may choose just to pick on specifics, like the key three things. I'll take it out. Anyone?
Okay. Well, I think the starting point is really simplicity and clarity. So if you have more than 5 KPI to measure your digital, then probably you're not really clear of what you want to achieve. And then you have to use different tools in different level of complexity to answer those questions. But never forget the big picture. And the big picture is most consumer journeys are not 100% digital. And what we see in our digital tools is covering only a very small fraction of advertising effectiveness. So don't get carried away with measuring to the nth degrees on your digital world, if in reality the majority of actions happen in the brain or happen on the high street. So I think that's very important.
Well, if it's 3, then we have to think of multi-channel attribution, like across devices, across digital channels, and online to offline. And I think these are the best 3, let's say, components that we have to look into, because it's definitely important how to measure our the client's ROI and return on every little euro or pound or anything.
Well, obviously, I second what you guys have mentioned. I think to take it a level further, it saddens me a little bit because I don't really hear people talking about incrementality test anymore. And it's a slightly complex one to set up, but if you're spending a lot of money, I would recommend having a look at it and looking at the right KPIs for it, obviously. If you're an e-commerce player, obviously net revenue would be what you're looking for, but if you're a brand, there are many other things. And of course, bringing it all together offline and online as much as you can.
To what you guys have said, I would only add 2 things. One, which is understand your sales cycle. So I think this is a point that I draw actually from Oliver's knowledge, and speaking to him, he made a very valid point around you need to understand how quick or how lengthy is your sales cycle, and on that plays a massive part in how you need to look at attribution. Because if you're selling, your sales cycle is fairly quick, then, we go back into a point, although we don't like, obviously, first touch, last touch, then, is it really worth putting all your efforts in breaking, something that might actually be, quite relevant or not be so misguiding? If your sales process is much lengthier, then that is definitely an area where, it should be kind of imperative for you to bring efforts back into thinking at least about attribution. And the second thing, which is kind of a wish and a consideration together, is to advertisers and in general, don't make it a race to the bottom. Like, return on ad spend is not what's bringing you the result at the cheapest. It's what's bringing you the best, like, midpoint, right? So, and this is going back to kind of previous experience and DSP experiences. the spray and pray approach, or which fuels the whole last touch rationale. Like, again, that's a race to the bottom. It doesn't help anyone. It doesn't help publishers. It doesn't help anyone within the ecosystem. So yes, attribute value, but make sure that whatever your methodology is, depending on what your sales cycle is, you definitely put your head to it and are inquisitive about it.
And I think it's safe to say on such a complex topic, there's a lot of different forms of opinion and things to measure. But ultimately, it comes down to simplifying what question you are trying to ask as a brand. How are you going to effectively measure that? And what are the right tools to be able to measure that? I think an ongoing kind of theme that's already started today is the requirement to invest in resource and expertise in order to be able to ask the right question and also assess that directly. Slightly conscious of time on there. I think, do we have some time for 1 or 2 questions from the audiences? Or are we running over slightly?
Go for one, quickly.
Do we have one from anyone in the audience? I don't see any hands. So in which...
Yeah, maybe I can answer to what Clem said. Yeah, I agree. I think once you start measuring what really creates value, you will see that, for example, viewability or brand safety or fraud, that quality, so professionally produced environments that engage users suddenly are looking much more cost effective than if you just look at the low CPMs. So, and I think that is the key learning that we have with many clients. The moment we start measuring harder, we evaluate quality. But quality also is not the brand of the publisher. I think that is a misconception. Quality is the ability of a publisher to draw the right audience and engage them. And then we are seeing that justifies higher investment. So in the end, I don't agree. It's always our job to drive the highest return on investment for the budget. But what we see is that doesn't mean buying the cheapest media.
Perfect, thank you. If we get a round of applause for all the panelists.
Thank you, guys. So we're going to go for a quick panel switch over. I can't see if anyone's in the room. I would like to welcome to the stage David Goddard. We're going to move on to a panel now, which is the evolution of connected TV in Europe. If the panelists would like to come up as well, that would be great. Yeah. And I'm just going to let you everyone into a small secret. Number 1, there is a break after this session, so listen to this session. Number 2, not known to many, but David, this is actually my last time as chair of the IAB Programmatic Trading Committee, and David Goddard is going to be my successor. So David will go forward as the chair of the Programmatic Trading Committee. With that, David, over to you.
Thank you very much. I've got some big shoes to fill. I might have to ask your first panel, who are getting a lot of socks from Santa, if I can borrow them all just to pad it out. And talking of Santa, I wrote to him earlier on this year and said, for Christmas, I'd like a panel on the evolution of connected TV in Europe. And Christmas has come early for me. Not only that, I'm chairing the panel. So my name's David Goddard. I'm the Vice President of Global Programmatic Strategy at BBC Global News. And before I introduce our panel of experts, this panel is going to be looking at evolution of connected TV in Europe. There's 1.74 billion, on last count, TV households out there, and it's forecasted by 2021, 98% of these will be using a connected TV. So this panel of experts is really critical to this, to exploring the opportunities that are as two worlds collide and the opportunity it presents for advertisers and media owners, and how connected TV is developing across Europe. So please, panel of experts, introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Martin O'Boyle and I work for Publicis Media Exchange, which is the trading and investment arm for Publicis Group. My role on a day-to-day level is working with our media, data and tech partners to help navigate the complexity that we've got currently and develop new, more valuable solutions for our clients. So my main focus over the last year is TV, video and most specifically connected TV.
Hi, I'm Sophie Knight from SpotX. I'm Director of Partnerships there. I look after our supply side partners and work with them to monetize their OTT and CTV inventory through the SpotX platform.
Hi there, my name is Glenn Pereira. I'm the Product Strategy Director at Integral Ad Science for the EMEA region. Largely what I do is look at how all the needs of the region differ and also change, and also where a lot of the similarities, and also take that to a broader level and look at what we should be building from a product point of view. And obviously, Europe being very complex, that's a big area of focus for me right now.
Cool. I'm Tom Fryatt, Head of Programmatic Development for OMG EMEA. So I look at the inventory we buy, the data we use to target, and the platforms that we partner with to push forward our programmatic capability development in EMEA. And I'm also running an experiment to see how hot a temperature panels can operate within, so I'm very happy to be part of this.
I'll be your thermometer for this.
Okay, so Tanzil Bakari, I'm the MD for Double Verify. I've been in the role for about 6 months, having joined, I don't know whether it was my sort of pleasure or for my sins. Spent 12 years at Google and DoubleClick, launched the DoubleClick Ad Exchange, and then worked with a lot of the big six holding companies globally on their strategy to engage in programmatic. So.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. And it makes sense, as was said, two worlds are colliding. So it makes sense, before we jump into in a panel entirely dedicated to connected TV, let's define what connected TV is up on here. Because in the kind of practice call we did beforehand, there was a lot of, let's say, disagreement, which is always good for a panel. Who would like to kick off with their definition of connected TV?
I'm quite happy to. So connected TV in its purest form is really just a device. It's a TV screen connected to the internet. However, I believe when we're talking about connected TV, we're talking about a lot more than that. We're talking about the opportunity to engage with advertisers on that TV screen in a way that we haven't been able to before. So before we bought spots on television, that's how you could engage with advertisers. The connected TV opportunity is to get that those consumers who are watching more on-demand content, and different platforms within that TV screen rather than that standard TV buy. I think connected TV as a word for advertisers is quite confusing, in all honesty, so we do need to come up with another one, but I don't really know what that could be at this moment.
Yeah, I would agree. SpotX and MTM did a research report a couple of years ago working with European broadcasters and streaming services, and we came up with a broad definition that it's the device that connects that delivers premium content via the open internet to a TV screen. So as we kind of spoke on that call, and in the IAB definition for CTV, it's up for debate still because there's not a certain definition that everybody's using.
Simply enough, it's that big screen for me. What we've noticed is that there's a good amount of confusion as to what's what, and so I think first and foremost, I think that's a good starting point for us to define that.
There's a willful lack of standardization across this region in particular. So you've got some, as you mentioned, the number of households and the sheer amount of money that the TV industry commands. You've got some very powerful trade bodies, industry bodies, broadcasters within that. And people have experimented and tried different things within that over the years, and what it's meant that the stretch the definition of connected TV that we're able to use has become pretty wide. So we use the term advanced TV, but basically a lot of the time what we mean is not linear, essentially, which is interesting in itself, I think.
So apparently, as an expert on CTV, and let the rest of my panelists here, we have no clue. I think the reality is, I think the easiest ways to look at it is where people are consuming and the screen and the size of the screen. And for us, CTV is a combination of whether it's an app or it's content through a box or whatever the medium is. It's the ability for a consumer to engage with a set of content that we can engage with from a targeting perspective on a large screen.
Thank you. For this panel, it's that TV, as Glenn said. But no, we're talking, connected TV is a device connected to the internet for this panel. But we know you can connect to the internet multiple ways with a connected TV, just for that level of complexity. There are many different CTV spend forecasts. As Daniel was saying earlier on, we're looking at growth. Some are saying that it's going to surpass online video as early as 2022. Not all agree, but what we can agree is connected TV is a catalyst for growth of digital advertising. How is this impacting currently the overall media and digital ecosystem?
I think it's seen a huge amount of innovation, basically. So you've got, as you say, a big pot of gold at the end of the rainbow if we can work out a lot of this stuff to encourage people to kind of build new solutions, new ways of targeting, and also reconciling some of the difficulties that this lack of standardization in a common context is difficult to maintain. But yeah, I think it's forcing people to rethink a little bit about their plans. It's being led by the consumer. So they are moving in ever-increasing numbers away from linear TV. And when I say that in a very broad brush statement and invite, the many Twitterati to kind of jump on me for that, I hasten to add I was a TV buyer in a past life, and I know what I was trying to go for, and that was large spots that build fame and unique reach. And those spots, whether you're in one market or another, and no matter which kind of side of the argument you fall, and everybody has a certain bias, it must be said, those opportunities are becoming more and more difficult to find. They're still out there. The high-reach spots are still there, and linear TV is amazingly powerful. But it's changing the shape of a media plan now as we try and keep up with the consumer.
If I was to look at it from the measurement point of view, looking at the opportunity, obviously the eyeballs are going there, the intention's going there, so therefore the money's going there. So thinking about it from a point of view of where's the threat or risk, I'm ever so concerned about the level of fraud that's happening there. Obviously coming from my measurement point of view. So one thing that came out of, I think it was from Campaign Asia, end of last year, the additional number of or percentage of apps being uploaded into stores was over 130% in 2018. And from, if I was in the business of fraud in that way, I'd be going straight for connected TV dollars as well. That's the greatest opportunity and threat right now, from a measurement point of view.
I think to add to what Tom was saying, the reality is that 15 years ago, if I started as a TV buyer as well, but 15 years ago, if I planned a TV campaign, I would expect to be able to get pretty much 100% of the people who are watching on TV have an opportunity to do that. The reality is today, particularly in the UK, is that that's shifted quite significantly. So talking of a pot of gold, TV has been one of the biggest media in the UK for a long time, but we are now seeing this consumer moving quite rapidly away from what we call linear TV, so spot TV, the traditional way that we buy TV. So a stat from Samsung TVs in the UK states that 41% of those TVs connected to the internet watch less than 2 hours of standard TV per month. That's tiny in terms of the amount of linear TV they consume. However, the reality is many people plan campaigns and TV campaigns as if they're going to get that 100%, when really they're only really going to be able to get maximum 59%. So there's a land grab. The problem that we have, or the issue that we have, is that the consumer is far ahead of the advertising community in its maturity. So, say for example, 59% of people still watch linear TV. It doesn't mean that we can then put 41% of our budget to connected TV and then get those consumers, because a lot of those consumers are consuming Netflix. They're looking at gaming. There's things like that. They are not available to buy from an ad point of view, and I think there's going to need to be a big acceleration from the ad product point of view so that we can actually start to get those consumers again. And I think the people who move quickly in this area are going to show great growth very quickly. So the likes of Samsung, who, for example, who are offering a linear-like products connected to the TV, that's really interesting, fully programmatically enabled, something that we haven't really been able to do within the UK to date. So I think there's a bit of a land grab, but we need to catch up the consumer fairly quickly.
Yeah, I was going to say, from a supply point of view, there's just more and new video content providers. Ones that there's people like Excite who are doing really cool things where you can like the music videos that they put on, and then it creates a playlist for you. Like, that's something that you would never normally associate with your TV. But doing cool stuff like that will will kind of change the landscape. And as we've seen more supply partners come in, hopefully they won't all be fraud, like Glenn's suggesting. But
Glenn will keep us safe.
Yeah, Glenn will keep us really safe. But yeah, there's just new opportunities, for advertisers, new ways of looking at content, which will be changing over the next year or so, I imagine.
Just to finish on that, I think a lot of the points that are raised are valid. I think that if we break it down, the audiences that we're going to be going after in this environment are going to be people who are moving from linear to OTT or connected TV audiences. So, for all intents and purposes, people who are cutting the cord with linear TV are moving to digital. A lot of the younger audiences today are starting there, right? So there's a new audience, there's new opportunities, and there's a new environment for brands to really go and engage with. And that's where we're seeing a lot of the high CPMs come from. In terms of what Sophie was saying, and the reality is, people and as an audience and as a brand and definitely publishers and platforms will go where the money is and where there's a lot of money. But that's also where a lot of the negative players will also end up going. And then finally, I think it comes down to technology because we are constantly evolving. The industry is getting broader. We're finding out of home and connected TV and all these different platforms, and you can set up panels like this with lots of new TV, lots of new tech vendors providing the sort of we can offer this nuanced sort of value here and there. I think the reality is, as an industry and as a tech industry, we really need to get our basics right. If we as an industry can do the basics on digital and the basics on linear TV and do those well, and then combine the best of both of those worlds, then I think CTV has a really good chance of adding value. Otherwise, we'll end up with, I think Daniel said it earlier, we're such a hype-based industry. We'll end up with CTV at some point next year sort of not being cool enough for us to talk about.
Talking about hype, we're kind of moving into that in our next question. So we're going to address that point right to the end, because as you're saying, we're seeing a mass movement to VOD, and there's an estimated last count, and again, multiple reports on this, with an estimated 1.5 billion VOD users globally. 60% of these are SVOD at the moment. But Deloitte published, I think, last year that the average household is going to have 2 to 5 subscriptions, meaning that there's a small amount of space on that subscription bundle, as people cord cut. That means we're going to see launching new CTV, not all fraud, hopefully, apps out there. They're going to have either AVOD or a mixed economy. So is the dream coming true for advertisers? All the advantages of linear TV, but now the targeting and measurement of online and digital? Or is it more complex than that?
I think it's definitely a lot of complexity to it. And then if we were to take, again, from the measurement point of view, everyone talks about standardizing and leveling the playing field in terms of how we can operate with each other. That's always a big ask. And there's 2 points this year which really, or 2 events this year which really stuck out in my mind where this was highlighted as a real gap. So number one was a summit that we ran with 70 of our partners in the UK. And I asked the question in this order: who's involved in buying video? Who's got video as a priority? And number 3, who's ready for the open measurement SDK framework? Or who's ready for VAST 4.1, VAST 4.2? Those 2 things are interlinked. And one person put half a hand up. It's like, okay, cool. So you're telling me that measurement's a problem, measurement's a need, but your actions are not mapping to that challenge. So that's one thing that I saw initially. And then speaking to a number of different broadcasters and publishers across Europe, which is a heavy part of what we do in terms of engaging, I said, listen, my standard issue question is, are you ready for VAST 4? And one person said, hold on a sec, I'm still on VAST 2. I was like, oh, okay, well, I guess we're all kind of in big trouble now. Obviously we're not, but the movement is a little slower than expected. And so when I hear folks say, we want to level the playing field, we want to be able to work in a standardized way, still a little bit of a struggle in terms of seeing the actions map to that need. So I'd say it's very complex.
I partly agree with what Glenn said. So I think what we should be mindful of is absolutely supporting 100% on kind of calls for standardization across the industry. And the only way we're going to get that kind of parity is by working together. What I'd express caution about is not throwing out the good with the bad. So there are all metrics from traditional ways of doing things on which huge media currencies are built upon and give advertisers an awful lot of confidence in the ability of that media channel to shift business metrics for them. And I think digital could still go a long way to talk TV's language in some cases. The other word that's kept coming up quite a bit is this word households. So the TV is a shared screen, or typically a shared screen. The number of TVs in most markets has been steadily falling as tablets have become more ubiquitous. So actually depending on what we're talking about connected TV, we're normally talking about the big screen in the living room. And we can get an awful lot of information just about households and give us some ability to target better than we will today, some ability to measure better than we will today. And we'll be pretty happy with that for the next couple of years, I would think, to build something pretty exciting in the world of advanced TV.
You know, I think as an industry, we're so sort of caught up in our buzzwords. I mean, I'm scared next year that standardization and quality standards becomes a buzzword. The reality is, we are. If we look at where we're coming from, to my point that I made before, we're coming from a digital ecosystem where we don't necessarily have clear quality guidelines across our standard media, and we're talking about CTV and measurement in CTV, and we're talking about VAST4 and VPaid and all these words, right? And the reality is brands are, I think Lucia said it earlier, we really need to focus on the outcomes, and the reality is CTV will be a component of whatever outcome and whatever engagement strategy they have. And we need to ensure that we learn from what we've done on digital, we apply the right standards, we set that baseline with some form of authentic environment. We understand our environments in terms of fraud. We understand it in terms of brand safety and viewability. All of these things we struggle with in digital today. So to think about how we would do it in CTV is probably a step too early. We really need to make sure we sort of get our house in order, and then look to sort of innovate across CTV. So I think we've got a little while to go.
I think that the advent of CTV and the advent of programmatic, automated, data-driven buying within TV is hugely exciting. I think that there's a lot of development that needs to happen at this point. But the reality, again, from an advertiser and agency point of view, is that TV, or traditional TV, or linear TV, as we've been calling it, has been siloed in terms of the fact that you can't really do data-driven linear TV. That's always been the narrative. I think what should be really exciting for all of us over the next few years, and I do think it's the next few years as opposed to the next few months, is that we can start to develop solutions that will be able to offer data-driven TV solutions. Because regardless of whether we call it linear TV for standard spot advertising or CTV, the consumer doesn't look at it like that. They just look at it as TV. It's television. When they're watching TV, they're watching TV. They don't care that it's a CTV product or a spot product. And I think the opportunity for us as an industry is to be able to offer a data-driven product across the whole screen. And I think that's really exciting. I don't think we're there yet, and I think there's going to be a lot of hype within next year as to things that we will be able to do in a few years, but claiming that we can do it now.
Let's just hope data-driven targeting doesn't mean keyword targeting, huh?
No, better audiences.
Yeah. My next question, but kind of Tom and Martin, you've already answered it. Should TV or digital metrics be used? And again, jump in here. But you kind of said it's a combination of both. But it feels like as these two worlds collide, there isn't going to be a perfect harmony. We're not kind of meeting halfway. One is going to have to move to the other's territory more than the other way around. So who is further away from connected TV at the moment? Is it the linear TV buying, with their metrics and measurement and things like that? Or is it digital? With our over complexity of, and buzzwords and all these things, do we need to move? Do digital need to be more TV, or TV need to be more digital?
I think hopefully this will still be a raging debate for a lot longer, because I find it really entertaining personally. But I think we'd all do well to listen to some of the lessons from the last panel and what they were talking about in terms of attribution and some of the sort of like dangers of last click. So everything that digital has been able to bring in terms of measurement today, it's still got inherent issues where people focus on proxy metrics or fundamentally flawed metrics that enable them to tell a certain story, and then later on they find that an over-reliance on performance and an over-focus on efficiency has been to the detriment of the brand that they're buying media for. Digital would do an awful, and referring to digital as this one big amorphous mass, but for the sake of this question, they would do well to look at the role that TV plays on an advertiser's media plan today. There's been a nice synergy between, what brands were looking for in terms of building brand and long-term effectiveness with the fame gaining ability of linear television. So I think a little bit more creep on digital side to get over to TV side of giving advertisers currencies and metrics that help them do that, I think would be a good idea in the short term. Later on, it's all about business outcomes anyway, so we can focus on that. But until then, yeah, let's build reach, TVRs, TARPs, whatever you want to call them.
It's the language at the end of the day, right? We're coming from two different parts of the world that talk two different languages, and I mean for TV buyers to sort of try to square block round hole CPMs into their world is very difficult, and vice versa. We do have to get to some kind of medium, and the reality is what CTV allows is more granularity, more visibility, more tracking and data, more so than what you get in a panel-based environment in linear TV. But the output that we're driving there, the outcomes we're driving, not the business outcomes, but the digital outcomes have to be translated into a language that sort of makes sense for both worlds. And if we can find what that language is, then I think we'll get there.
I've heard opposing views from some of the either the holding groups or clients where one will say, listen, I'm a CPG driven company and product and consumer, so I really need to think about how does age and gender fit in with my wider measurement verification, et cetera, and then everything else is a nice to have. Then I've heard opposing views where it's completely opposite. So listen, like we are an outcomes driven, we are also looking at beyond just socio and demo. So age and gender is a nice to have, but brand safety, viewability, fraud, et cetera, you can have in digital is the core. So it feels like it's very middle of the road as to what's going to be useful for whether it's TRPs and GRPs or whether it's going to be wider metrics that are on offer right now. So as you said, worlds colliding. I think it's who takes which road is a questionable one, but I think it's super interesting to see how it plays out.
I think the reality, just to follow up on that point, is when we look at brands and their engagement on TV and on digital. I mean, in this world, most brands are happy to run after sort of ITV news, and I mean, regardless of what the news content was, they were happy to run on it on TV, but they won't run on it on digital. And so when we talk about languages and we talk about how these two worlds come together and how that applies to fraud and viewability, there's a long way for us to go yet.
Amazing. Look, we're short on time. I've only got 4 minutes left. 5, maybe 5. Oh, I've got another minute, yes. Just wanted to come back to the thing on it. We've been focusing quite a lot from the tech infrastructure and from the way the advertiser views it as well. I'm the kind of token publisher on here. We do have a bit of RTL representation as well. And looking at connected TV, there are multiple ways for a publisher to surface their content on there, whether we go down the road of OTT apps or partner with smart TV companies to do IPTV, EPGs. There are variety. Does the advertiser, what I'm keen to understand is, so publishers could potentially prioritize their attention. Do the advertisers care what environment outside of context that the ad falls within? So do they go, I definitely want OTT app, or I want ITV EPG, or is it just, I want big screens, please?
I don't believe that that's the primary concern. I think the primary concern is getting the right audience around the right content. I think that's their primary concern. So whether it's consumed through an app or whether it's consumed through a linear feed, I don't think that's what the advertiser's asking us. I think us, this group, and actually the industry as a whole, we need to navigate how we deliver the right audience in the right content for them. So I personally couldn't give you advice on that. I think you have to chase the widest audience as relatively quickly as possible if I was to give advice.
And Sophie, from a SpotX point of view, I'm keen, how you're surfacing it. Are you splitting out, or is it?
No, so from our point of view, at the moment, there doesn't seem to be a case of the advertisers splitting it at all, and there are benefits for a publisher for both. There's like the EPG with Samsung TV Plus. The user experience is great. The user has, as Martin alluded to earlier, the user has no idea if it's a linear ad that they're seeing or a CTV like programmatic ad that they're seeing. They just are watching the channel and enjoying the content. But then there's also power in having apps that are already loaded onto the TV. The user actively goes to that. They're looking for that content. But then for a publisher, there's costs and maintenance and driving users to that app like obviously costs money, takes time, and a team behind it. So I don't think there's any right or wrong that a publisher should be doing at the moment. And we're seeing some really interesting things of traditional publishers looking at their video content and how they can transcend that into the CTV world, which will be a really exciting space to see as that grows and develops over the next year or so.
There's so many paths to success with this, and it's just finding the right one for you, long term and short term. Yeah. Fantastic. I just want to jump on to, I'm going to combine the next one. So how does the adoption of connected TVs differ across Europe, and which publishers or advertisers are doing connected TV well at the moment? Ones we could look to as that unicorn or standard bearer or something like that.
So from a cross-market, across inter-country kind of perspective, the adoption of standards in terms of connected TV from a management point of view, again, it's a little off to see. Some markets are doing better. France and Germany are definitely doing interesting things, especially companies like M6 and also France Télévisions. Very interesting. Obviously, RTL set the standard across some markets as well. But as far as markets go, that's where I'd say they are.
Yeah, and we see it's completely different across market depending on how much uptake there has been of smart TVs, broadband connectivity, how accessible apps and services are. Is completely different across each market, which then also makes it hard to define anything as well, adding to more complexity. But in the UK, we're well placed to imitate what the US have been doing. We've still got a long, long way to go. There's not as much scale or uptake, but it's slowly coming. We're seeing so much growth. And then all the other markets are slightly behind us, but kind of getting there. But there's different enablers across the markets which are needed to make it work.
I think you've got to give a shout out to Sky AdSmart on this particular one. Appears to be one of the driving reasons why there was interest from the US, and a lot of that transpired with Comcast. They've developed an amazing solution, and it has been road tested for a number of years now. There's a number of different advertisers within our group who've tested it to success. It's also opened up TV as a medium, the opportunity, as Glenn mentions, to put a kind of ad on the big screen to a new group of advertisers for whom the barriers to entry with linear TV were simply too great. So, I go back to the original and the best in some ways, the Sky AdSmart example. The other one I think is worth calling out, because not forgetting the creative in all this. So another company that's kind of been plugging away in the CTV space for some time now is Innovid, and I'm sure they're compliant with every known standard going, and they do think about the extra opportunity that the interactivity of a CTV screen allows, and then adapts people's lovingly crafted creative to take advantage of that.
Just a quick point. I think we're such a data-driven industry, and a lot of the OEMs are now taking ownership of that data and their engagement. So rather than having the content being the driver, the device becomes the driver. And so companies like Samba and Alfonso are also going to be interesting to watch next year as we sort of look to them to provide data on how people are consuming, how people are using, and maybe even just Samsung and the OEMs themselves.
Fantastic. And classic panel question to end. 12 months and beyond. What does the future hold for connected TV?
I think it's going to be hugely complex. We've got an explosion of content options coming for the consumer in the UK and multiple markets with Disney Plus, Apple TV Plus, HBO Max, etc., etc., etc. I think it's going to be a bit of a land grab amongst those platforms, and also we're going to see the growth, I believe, of AVOD solutions. Maybe not in the next 12 months, but in the next definitely 24 to 36 months, as there will be clear winners and losers in the SVOD world. But there's going to be a lot of players, and and certain businesses will probably have to pivot from a SVOD to an AVOD at some point.
Yeah, I think we can see the TV is becoming maybe the mobile of the home. So people will be interacting with their TV in a completely different way to they are now. It won't just be a box in the corner that people turn on. There'll be a lot more interactivity and people, using their TV in that way. TV manufacturers like Samsung TV Plus, I think they'll just continue to grow and thrive in the environment. There's lots of really cool stuff going on there, so that would be really good. And then I think also we've seen the likes of DAZN up for putting bids in for the Champions League or something like that. But just seeing partners like that who are clearly CTV focused, kind of their strategy and focus to kind of be competing with the broadcasters and linear providers. I think we'll see more of that, which will be interesting to see how they end up competing.
So I'm very interested to see how measurement plays out and also how the buying habits change. Also really very much interested to see how something like audience measurement comes into the mix and how that can come together, and then obviously helping whether it's cross-channel, cross-platform, and bringing that all together. So that's definitely further down the line, but very interested to see how that happens.
Streaming wars playing out. It's going to be super exciting to watch from our vantage point. And yeah, something to watch out for as well. Amazon are partnering with kind of a couple of manufacturers. So Amazon branded TVs. I hear they've got quite an attractive data set and maybe this big e-commerce platform attached to it, something like that. So yeah, that should be interesting as they actually put a big screen in people's homes.
So I think I agree with a lot of what's been said. So I'm going to take a slightly different approach to the answer. For those that know me, it's common. So you know, from a brand's perspective, CTV is this big shiny new toy that everybody should be engaging with, and the reality is, I think the three pieces of advice, right? First of all, let's make sure we get our house in order in what we're doing. So when we look at digital and linear, and this being a sort of an aggregation, a culmination of that we do those things well. So we set a baseline of sort of quality in digital and in linear, and we sort of bring the best of that together. For those that know me as well, I have a tagline right now. It's called "Challenge the Status Quo," and it's about making sure that we don't do what we're comfortable with. And this is probably definitely a message to some of the agencies and definitely a lot of the brands is. It's pushing the boundaries on what technology is enabling you to do today, rather than trying to worry about what tomorrow holds. And then thirdly, it's about making sure that we educate the market and we bring the right people forward. It's very difficult to do that in-house. The agencies add so much value because they have a lot of that expertise. And how do you both make use of it and how do you value it? I think that's three conversations and three pieces of advice that we should push to all brands going into next year, on top of everything that these guys have said.
Because of the lack of time, and I cannot top Tansel's wrap up, I'm going to end it there. So big round of applause for the Connected TV Expert panel.
And we're going to go to a 15-minute break now. So anyone on the live stream, get a cup of coffee. Anyone in this room, go grab a shower. It's really hot up here. Okay, 15 minutes, we'll be back. Thank you. Hi, everybody. So welcome back to the second half of the Virtual Programmatic Day. We have an esteemed panel already up on stage, and I'm just going to click forward. Hopefully it will work. Oh, no, that's the wrong button. Oh, quick. Hold on. That's the right one, but we now need to get it to present. Can someone help me from over here? There we go. It's amazing what you can fix. I'm never touching the clicker again. So we're now into the last, into the afternoon of the panels. I think 3 more panels to go. I have been asked to remind people in the room there will be some drinks and nibbles at the end as well. And with that, I'm going to hand straight over to the wonderful panel.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back. I'm Catherine Lofthouse. I work at Essence. I'm the Programmatic Account Director for Google's brand spend in EMEA, and it gives me great pleasure to be here today with this fantastic bunch of people. We're going to be discussing programmatic in a post-cookie era, and hopefully it's been quite transparent so far that this is a really fundamental topic, a really broad topic, and should give us plenty to get our teeth into. So, Lisa, maybe if you'd like to start by introducing yourself, a bit about what you do, and then we'll work along the row.
So I'm Lisa Kaluzhny. I run demand for EMEA at Pubmatic, which is an SSP, and I moved over to this market about 3 years ago from our New York office.
Hey, so I'm Tej. I'm VP of Group Development at Publicis Media. I work for Precision, which is our programmatic consultancy across our brands and advertisers.
I'm Sarah Vincent. I am Head of Strategic Partner Development at Index Exchange, which is an SSP, and I look after the international region for the business.
Hi, my name's Matt Benathan. I work for Oracle Data Crowd, and I look after our channel partnerships, our platform relationships in EMEA, LATAM, and JPAC.
Hi, my name's Takara Baker, and I work for Adobe's advertising cloud product, leading product marketing across Europe, and I moved here about 4 years ago from California.
Brilliant. Well, thank you, everyone. First, I just want to set the scene. Like many topics under programmatic, this is a very broad one. So I just want to open by asking, what do we mean when we talk about the post-cookie era? So I think maybe, Lisa, would you like to start us off?
Yeah, sure. So I think that there's a number of things that are obviously the post-cookie era, shutting off ITP, everything that Safari has done previously, that Chrome is starting to do, and Firefox has done as well, of just shutting down the cookie and understanding what will be next. How will advertisers be able to run targeted campaigns? What does that audience targeting look like? And how do we help programmatic survive within that?
Yeah, great. And Tej, obviously, from a buy side, your perspective on that?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I think first and foremost, we need to clarify it's a third-party cookie and not first-party, which is super important. I think there's been a cat and mouse game between vendors and browsers. You know, we started with 2 years ago with 0.1 or 1 for in-pledge tracking, and now we're up to 2.3, where it's now stopping link declaration, and we're thinking about link attribution and all these sort of things with Safari. To Lisa's point, we've seen it with Firefox. Chrome is kind of sitting on the edge, kind of same site, looking at the context of where the cookie sits, so they're kind of playing the middle ground. But obviously this has all been led by the consumers. You know, consumer privacy has been the overarching topic here.
Yeah, definitely. And Takara as well, I think you guys had definitely some input because there's, like we said, browser considerations, there's considerations about consent, so there's a lot going on here. What's your input into that?
Yeah, I mean, there are a couple of things that have happened in the last couple of years that have brought this topic to the forefront. So there's all the changes that are happening within browsers. There's the rise of mobile, and just the fact that third-party cookies or cookies don't necessarily work on mobile devices. And there's just this shift that we're seeing on the Adobe side where advertisers and brands are focused on customer experience management that sits outside of just, advertising. So it's really a focus on how do we evolve with the changes in technology and the changes in platforms to really understand the journey of the consumer.
Yeah, definitely. So that's kind of a brief overview. We've thought quite generally about it, but what have these changes meant in reality so far for the industry, and what's been implemented? Because, you know, we've talked a lot about theory, but let's put this into reality. What's it coming down to, you know, in the day-to-day when we look at our media plans? Takara, do you want to take that one again?
Yeah. So what we're seeing is just people are starting to think about, how can I stitch together disparate pieces of data? What are those technology solutions that are available for me to, understand what's happening across device, what's happening cross channel, and really link all of that together. On our end, from a technology standpoint, we have been just digging into how do we ensure consumer privacy along with that ability to track the journey and allowing the ability to ingest many different data points and data sets.
Yeah, very much like a balance to be struck there. So yeah, Matt as well. I guess from you guys, a lot of infrastructure to consider.
Yeah, exactly. It's interesting, and the feedback that we've had from advertisers and brands and agencies, of course, working in this space is that we need to put the consumer first, and that consumer, normally a customer, in fact, and their experience and their journey is paramount. And we're always going to be faced with technological challenges as to how we can deliver an outstanding, a delightful consumer journey at the same time as respecting privacy. And of course, privacy considerations and data protection and so on has changed very fundamentally in Europe quite recently. But if we can take that customer, that consumer journey from first-party data assets and provide our clients with technology to help them do that, we're starting to overlap that first-party data with contextual services and understand the contextual environment within which those customers are, or those consumers are browsing, or whatever they may be doing. And then, of course, connecting devices as well, really important point. And measuring outcomes. That's the final piece of the jigsaw as we see it, because we still have a huge amount of demand from our brands to prove our worth. And I think we should all be mindful of that in this industry.
Brilliant. So I guess, Tej, how's that embodying itself from a buying perspective?
I think Matt hit all the right points. I think we're seeing a continuous surgence between the MarTech and AdTech landscapes merging together around first-party data, the growth of CDPs. We're not super worried about the decline of the third party. There's so many different strategies in play. From an agency perspective, we're looking at different strategies for different browsers, how we push it to in-app, how we look at contextual modeling. First party being a big one. We're also looking at how we can take our advertisers' audiences and see publisher audiences and how we can marry those sets together as well. So there's so many different approaches that we can take, but CDPs, first party, are fundamental to a lot of this.
If I'll just add to that, more from the publisher side, that a blocking of third-party cookies represents like a fundamental change to the industry. It's a seismic shift. We've seen, as we mentioned, Firefox now blocking third parties in markets where we had higher Firefox adoption than we do in the UK, for example, Germany. It's been massively impactful for publisher revenue. I think the bid rates have dropped by about 40% on those publishers, and some are seeing upwards of 40% revenue drop as well. So we're talking about markets that are dependent on browsers where the browser then makes a change. It's massively impactful on the business. There needs to be an alternative, and this might sound a bit alarmist because it is. I think that publishers, brands, we need to be looking at how we can move away from the reliance of the cookie, be less at the liberty of these browser changes and technology changes, and actually start building a system that's based on something that's robust and much more scalable than the cookie ever was. In the short term, this is challenging. It's maybe we see a redistribution of fund revenue going into contextual, as was mentioned, potentially maybe more programmatic guarantee. But in the long term, we should be working towards a more authenticated web. So logged in users, a trusted environment, making the open web as bringing that to a parity with the walled gardens, and that's based again on the user trust. They need to know that their privacy data is going to be used in the right way, and that's essentially an amazing foundation to build on from here.
Brilliant. Yeah, so a lot going on there. Oh, sure.
Sorry,
no, yeah,
jump in. Sorry, Catherine. I was just going to say, I don't actually, I disagree that the cookie will ever die. I think it's just going to emerge in a different way. I was reading an article yesterday where the title was like post-cookie era, the show will go on. So I think it's just a matter of looking at how we as consumers, not people in the ad tech industry, view the cookie and the value exchange that we have for it, and whether it's helping publishers figure out a solution utilizing their first-party data, helping advertisers the same way, because we all sit on so much data. So how do we actually use that in a productive way and keep it in a structure that is GDPR compliant, CCPA compliant, brand safe, and gives that consumer the value exchange?
Yeah, no, very much so. I mean, huge, topics that you've touched on, which really amalgamate to make this whole theme. What I would like to talk about, you mentioned there, the show will go on. It will, but it will go on with a workaround, right? Whatever form that may take, and we've touched on a few of those already with contextual, with PG buying, with another form of identifier, right? So I guess I want to also touch back on your point, Sarah. You said you feel like there's going to be a big drop, there's a big change. Are we ready for it? Are we ready for it right now? Or is it going to hit us as an industry maybe a bit harder than we expected? And what can we do proactively as an industry to make sure that when that change does come, we can work effectively and seamlessly to transition through it, to keep the show going on?
Yeah, I mean, the change has happened already with respect of those browsers. As we mentioned, Chrome, I don't think is going to be changing that anytime soon. But it's just a fundamental mind shift of let's not be reliant so much on the third-party cookie. There are alternatives. Let's look at them. And it's not, I think the time of thinking has kind of gone. It should be now more acting on that and trying to find the alternative. So some publishers now, proactive, forward-thinking publishers, are already thinking how they can create a value exchange with their user and start building up their first-party data. Because, as I said, that will bring them up to parity with the walled gardens. It will unlock a budget that they currently don't see. As it is, if no changes are made, then that we will just continue to see the flow of spend move across to the walled gardens, which isn't great for the open web, isn't great for, amazingly content sites.
Yeah, it's spot on. I think, we might actually arrive at a point, one of the preferable outcomes of GDPR, whereby it's a two-sided coin, because the walled gardens have got stronger as a result of some of this, but also there's a great opportunity for high-quality content to become more valuable and to be rewarded with increased ad revenue and a better consumer experience. That opportunity exists, and actually it has nothing to do necessarily with a cookie. That's the mechanism we've all been using and we're all familiar with. Chromageddon may or may not be round the corner. I think it will be a fairly gradual decline. They've made it pretty clear as of last Thursday that first-party use cases are still going to be very much included within that. Third-party use cases and the lack of transparency around, everyone's very familiar with that point and what consumers think about it and what regulators are doing with it. But I'm sincerely hopeful that we all have an opportunity to shift things back towards good quality on the sales side, on the publisher side, and reward that quality accordingly.
Yeah, so I guess obviously, like you say, quality is intrinsically important to what we do because it brings value. So how do we safeguard that value, and how do we make sure that, thinking about these value exchanges that we have and the way that they're changing, how do we ensure that the right permission and the right relationship are built with the customer moving forward?
I think it's about education. So I think all consumers who within Europe know what GDPR is because they've all gone to a website and they've all had to accept consent. And most people do it because they can't be bothered to figure out how to not allow consent. And it's all the CMPs have made it rather challenging, which has caused a conundrum amongst itself. So how do you to educate somebody is to be able to explain it to them in a language that they understand and without making it really complex. And I think as ad tech companies, we all know how to make things really complex and use acronyms and words that are just completely irrelevant to consumers, but to be able to translate it to a language they understand. And I think go back to that value exchange will allow for a much more trust, which is all I think what it goes down to.
Yeah, definitely. Trust, again, being at the heart of how people interact with advertising, right? Without trust, you can't build brands. So it'd be really interesting to hear from like a media planning perspective.
I think I'd like to go back to the previous question. I think there was a couple of points that we need to highlight there, especially when we talk about browsers and OS, and we can't be held hostage to those IDs because they can change a flick of a button. And who's stopping Apple, who's the most consumer-centric brand, has no skin in the game, turning off IDFA tomorrow morning? Nothing stops them. So definitely agree that we need to come around and rally around a more robust solution. First and foremost, on the last point, to your point around cookies will, in third parties, will disappear. There is no question about that. I think we actually want them as an industry to disappear. We want to clean this industry up. We want to make it simple. We've overcomplicated it from a technology perspective. I think value exchange comes down to, from a publisher perspective, and our perspective, is UI. I think when you look at consent management platforms, the user experience, how they've been pushed onto publisher interfaces is difficult. A user hasn't even figured out if this publisher's content is right for them, if it has any value for them, yet they're presented with this CMP. I think we're seeing a lot of publisher consortiums coming together, Ozone being one, for example. I think they need to come together and have a UI where if you opt into one, you opt into all of them, and you can have that ID, because I think the user experience is totally bad, like from my perspective, just speaking as a consumer. So I think we do have pieces that we need to put together, and we need to bring the industry together, especially in the 20% that we work in, as opposed to the 80%, which we all know where it's going. So we have a responsibility to come together and give our brands better user experiences to the consumers when they resonate with their messaging.
There's a value exchange here for consumers, and I'm hesitant about the idea of little micropayments and making people pay for content in slightly different ways, or perhaps it gets very dangerous, I think, when you're incentivizing consumers or users to make certain decisions about viewing content. I mean, that reminds me of incentivized lead gen about 20 years ago, and that was rubbish then. So we shouldn't do that again. But also, there is a value exchange for advertisers here as well, and this is a deal between consumers and advertisers. The consumers get value from the content, the advertisers get value from the advertising, and therefore the internet is free. That's it. And therefore, what we need to do is make sure that we're measuring the outcomes for advertisers effectively, that we're ensuring that advertising is viewable, it's free from invalid traffic and bots, that attention and engagement metrics are where we want them to be. And again, if you're connecting the dots back to first-party to consumer data, you're measuring the outcomes from a return on investment and sales uplift perspective as well. So that value exchange is both ways.
Yeah. Oh, okay. So, yeah, I mean, that's really important, right? On the advertising end, it's creating that value exchange with the consumer. But also, I think one thing that also becomes important is just respecting and understanding how you're going to use that data and how you're going to message customers. And so ensuring that sort of, one, there's the relevancy, there's the non-annoyance, there's the creepy factor that's happening, and really thinking through, especially as we are just looking at how we understand offline to online purchase, how we connect MarTech and AdTech, how we understand when we need to cross-sell, upsell from an advertising end, even knowing when we shouldn't even be serving those ads, or really respecting just the role of the customer. I think GDPR is an interesting one, and we've done a lot of looked at just what are the customer or consumer perceptions to that today, and in some ways I think we do need to be very clear in the messaging to consumers, because it's turning into that sort of terms and agreement sheet that you get when you buy something that you kind of like throw away. People are just like, okay. And so it's very clear today that we do need to be very descriptive and clear to consumers about what we're doing with data, how it's going to be used before they can opt into that.
I disagree on your concept of incentivization, because I think that if I enter my email address and then I get 10% off on a product that I might have already been looking at, the brand is happy because now they have my contact information. I'm happy because I was already going to buy something. Again, I think something like rewarded video, where you watch a video and you get an extra life. I think all of those things are very clear to a consumer that there is a value exchange. And I think that plenty of people who are setting up ad blockers and are the ones that are questioning our industry would be more willing to provide their data if there was a value exchange, and if they were getting things like share your data, you get tokens to read an article, subscribe to this, you get this. I think that it's all about understanding what the benefit is for consumers.
I mean, I fully agree with you, Lisa, that you know, publishers need to figure out what that value exchange looks like for their users. So first of all, it's, you know, being very clear about how you're going to use that data that they will provide and which partners you work with, and making sure you are, you know, in line with all regulatory requirements. But ultimately, you need to understand your publisher to know what works, and in some cases it may be more incentivized than others. In others, you know, for publishers it may be newsletters. Talking about going back 20 years, you know, there's all these different iterations of what a value exchange looks like.
Agreed. You know, I'm just mindful it's a slippery slope, and you've called out some extremely solid examples of incentivizing somebody to sign up to, you know, to email newsletters or whatever, and obviously that's entirely valid. There's a creeping demand for more and more sign-ups to those newsletters or whatever it might be, and therefore the net gets a little bit bigger, and different methods of incentivization may not necessarily produce the genuine sign-ups that you're looking for.
Yeah, it looks very much like success in this space is going to be to do with the architecture and the infrastructure, and as well the collaboration between how all of that data is being pulled in as well. So I think one of our colleagues earlier mentioned some kind of consortium or like unified agnostic space in which to put and house all of that data to make it universally accepted, true, and accessible across the industry. So to that point, how do we put these, again, very theoretical, very top-level concepts into reality? And more pertinently, whose responsibility is that? There are a lot of agents. There are a lot of players. Who's going to, you know, step up to the plate, or who has been stepping up to the plate so far to make something like this a really workable, scalable reality?
So I think last year we were talking about Universal ID as Digitrust really launched. The IAB bought Digitrust. It started launching across Europe. And I think that was something that it was owned by a third party. So it wasn't like a DSP or just a company that could be bought at any point in time. And it was a trusted opportunity. And then as kind of identity became a hotter topic, more and more companies started popping up. You have specific ones that are regional specific, like NetID in Germany. And then you start looking at, okay, fine. So we're going from millions upon billions of different like IDs to then having what, like 10, 20, like where is that going to stop? And I think that the IAB has a great opportunity with Digitrust to try to really take on that market share and be that third party.
I think you're right. I think from a technology perspective, I think there's ID is an opportunity for growth, and technology vendors want to get to it. But what we've actually done is we've created our own lunarscape of IDs and confused the whole market around which one is right, which one isn't. None of them are proven. You know, from our perspective, we're very agnostic with technology. We test them. There's still no scale to some of them. Yeah. They're not proven in the sense they're not flexible. Like a lot of them are using it through appending it onto first party, which is fine, like ID5, for example, and you got your consortiums that you mentioned, LiveRamp today as well. So from our perspective, it's important we come together, because all we're doing is actually causing confusion and actually just sending money towards the walled gardens. And, you know, we need to play game with the ID space. And to your point earlier, I agree, it needs to be independent. It needs to be run by a trusted body. Don't know who that is right now. It's in who's got the legs and who's got the technology, who's got the scale. I think it's too early to call that. I think next year will be a lot of testing, a lot of robust testing from our perspective anyway with our clients. We're testing a few right now, but we're not there yet. And I don't think anyone is. So that's where the reality is.
I think that's like a really good point, that it's difficult to say it's the one body's responsibility. It's everybody's responsibility. It's the whole industry, and there isn't one tried and tested option right now that, you know, is going to fit everybody. So it is a bit of trial and error, but we need to have a willingness to make those steps towards trialing, and obviously erroring, if that's the word.
It can be.
Yeah, for now it is. But I also read an article about American Express that were trying to run campaigns that were not based on third-party cookies, therefore going out there and looking how they can access inventory, how they can utilize the data they have against what the data the publishers have. And I think the result of that is really they're saying that, we just need to work with a publisher where the technology works and it all kind of fits together. And that doesn't mean it's every single publisher that will work for them. So at least there are steps being made, though, and brands are looking to trial that.
Yeah, just because there's, I guess, to your point, a lot of fragmentation, a lot of options out there. Maybe don't consider them all. Maybe consider fewer and stick with what you know. And, if that is success for your business and your brand, then fantastic. On top of that, I guess a point again for you, Tej. Do you think that our partners, our brands, do you think they really have a deep understanding of this when we talk to them about buying their media on a more day-to-day basis, and do you think that they understand the implications of moving forward into this cookieless world?
Honestly, no. Being very transparent, I think it's our job to educate them and to make it simple. I think we're trying to figure it out ourselves right now. I think every single entity is trying to figure it out. So our job, going back to Lisa's point, it's all around education. Education is key here to understanding actually if we use your first-party data, what we could actually do. In fact, I think I'm actually quite optimistic about next year because I think we're cleaning up this space. I think we're going to have better quality opted-in users who want to be advertised as opposed to mass who don't really want to be targeted, and a lot of wastage in that space. You can have all the brand safety you want in the world, but really the reality is you're probably wasting some of it. So I'm quite optimistic in that sense. So we're educating our clients on a day-to-day basis. Some of them are hearing a lot of press news and they want to know certain vendors, so we're reviewing them. We run a verified program, which is very much a tried and tested. We run every single vendor through their paces, and that's what we're doing with certain clients who will bring certain vendors to the table, and likewise we will reach out to certain vendors and test it, but it's all around education right now for us.
Yeah, brilliant. So it looks like we've got a lot of opportunity in the space, a lot of innovation going on. It's looking like there are potential wins with PG, contextual buying. We talked about token systems as well. So I guess as a closing and quite broad question to you all, we'll see where we go with that. What do you think is going to come out on top as the sort of premier solution to this? A long and a short term view would be great to see as well. And why? Takora, should we start?
Yeah, sure. I think so. In the short term, and this is a conversation we're having with a lot of our customers. A lot of people are looking towards kind of what's the universal ID solution that we can look at, and who can we partner with to start to just identify what's happening within digital. That's a small piece of really kind of managing this and mitigating what we're seeing with the decline of the cookie. And so we're really focused for us personally, because we know there are so many different solutions. There's so many different areas that we need to stitch together. What are those data platforms that can really allow that capability, but also make it simple for people to use, that are compliant for people, and really allow the ability to share across your various partners within your ecosystem?
We want to be measuring outcomes in brand suitable environments, your first party data in brand suitable environments, and measuring outcomes of that. That's what we'll be doing next year.
I think anyone who adopts a people first identity approach to marketing will come out on top. But that is it. Steps are being taken now, but it's probably more of a medium term reality. We at Index have done some people-based marketing with Merkle in the US, so that has been a bit more sort of buy-side led actually. But it's proof in concept, it works. So we'll see more and more rollout of that. But essentially, those that come out on top should be the open web.
Yeah, I think for short term, we've got multiple different strategies at play to help our clients. From about contextual modeling, etc. Long term, we're looking at first-party data plays with our enterprise partners as well, and combining that. And obviously, the ICO is going to mix it up again next year, I suppose, as well. And that's going to be interesting. So for us, it's all around innovation, testing, scrutinizing every single ID vendor, and making sure we back the right one. And that might not just be one. To your point, that might be a few. It depends how many bid requests can work, and there's so many different options out there. But I think next year is going to be around a lot of innovation in this space.
I think from a programmatic standpoint is really helping both publishers and advertisers with their first-party data and understanding what can be done with it. And then from my own personal perspective, I think fingerprinting, is it a friend or is it a foe?
Oh. We don't have time for that, I'm afraid. Brilliant. There's obviously a lot going on in this space, which is breeding so much innovation, so many interesting conversations. So I guess, for Christmas, I'd like a crystal ball to see what comes out on top in future. So thank you so much to all of our panelists. What a fantastic discussion, and thank you for hosting.
Thank you. Thanks.
What an incredible panel, and we probably could have given them another hour and there'd still be more stuff to talk about. Unfortunately, time marches on, so I'd like to invite Ben Geach to the stage, and Ben will take us through a panel around making programmatic work for publishers.
Great, thank you everybody. So if I could invite my panelists to come up and join me on stage, we'll do some introductions and get started. Yeah, do you want to shuffle around? All right, should we click forward? See if this will sit over there. Sorry, there we go. There's the right photos. Perfect. Good stuff. Perfect. And one more. Perfect. Great. Thanks. Perfect. I think we're on the right order now, so great. So good afternoon, everybody, especially those who are joining us on the live stream or may well be listening to this a little bit later on the recording. So as a brief introduction, I'm Ben Geach. I lead the product strategy for Oracle Data Cloud. So we've got a stellar cast here of industry experts across the publishing ecosystem, and they're going to be tackling some of the tough questions in the publishing world. And I'd like the panelists to introduce themselves. Perhaps you could say a little bit about who you are and what part of the ecosystem you work in. So let's start this way.
Okay, so hi everyone. I'm Elsa Domain-Griffiths from The Telegraph, where I head up commercial innovations. And right now, I'm really regretting wearing this massive jumper under these lights. So yeah, lesson learned for next time.
Absolutely.
Hey guys, I'm Vignesh Narayan. I lead media partnerships for MediaMath. Interesting having a buy-side person coming here on talking to publishers, but I lead. I work with SSPs, publishers, data partners across international markets in EMEA, APAC, and LATAM.
Perfect. Great.
Hi guys, my name is Szymon Pruszyński. I work in Yieldbird, and we are one of the biggest global yield optimization companies. We support now over 250 publishers in all things programmatic, with a strong focus on inventory pricing and on additional demand implementation and management.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Emmanuel Ogden, Commercial Director for Freewill. We basically have two separate SSPs and ad servers, one for our TV full stack and one for our digital full stack.
Hi everyone, my name is Jericho Lemler. I'm working for Digital Ad Services. We are an operations unit for the biggest sales house in Switzerland called Goldbach, and also the biggest media house in Switzerland called Tamedia. And yeah, we're having a bunch of publishers around news platforms and classifieds, so excited to be here.
Perfect, that's great. So I think we should start with a question about how programmatic is taking over digital advertising. I think that we all know that it's fueled by advertisers who are enticed by the advantages of programmatic, such as the ability to reach consumers at scale. A broad question, I think, but I just want to start off with, as this shift continues, how would you feel that publishers feel about this shift? So maybe, Szymon, we can start with you.
So basically, it's, from my perspective, a very broad question, because you have big publishers like media groups present here today, but you also have middle-sized or small publishers like people sitting in home in Poland having a website about ski jumping, which generates 50 million page views a month on the high season. So they look at it from a different perspective, in my opinion. So the smaller ones will be happy about programmatic, because for them, they don't have enough sales power to go to the market, to agencies, to direct buyers and get some money from advertising. So they can plug in AdSense or any other SSP on their side and just make money out of it and just take care about the content, who, in my opinion, is good still, quality. But the bigger ones, they are also seeing programmatic as opportunity, but also with bigger amount of caution, mostly about control. because you don't have as much control over what kind of ads are on your site if it's not hurting your UX or something, but also regarding the prices, because still, especially in CE, programmatic is perceived as cheaper model of advertising, so they are used to selling high CPM campaigns for their direct clients, and they really have to understand and try to figure out a way in which they can sell programmatically, but also for high CPMs, and not devaluate the inventory they have.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think that it's good to appreciate there is a long tail of publishers as well, and that often the solutions that we develop may be for the bigger ones as well. Emmanuel, do any of those points resonate with you?
Some do, and a couple don't. So from a broadcaster perspective and a premium publisher perspective, yes, the open marketplace, you could say the broadcasters have been very hesitant in terms of, entering the programmatic world, although the programmatic world has evolved over the last, let's say, 3 to 5 years quite extensively. However, with developments such as Programmatic Guaranteed that enables them to work in a programmatic capacity that gives them that level of control, it has effectively excited them. And, most of these broadcasters nowadays are now seeing this as, the opportunity to drive obviously incremental spend from, agencies and advertisers, especially where those buyers want to get scale in terms of the large screen.
Mm-hmm. That makes a lot of sense. And Emmanuel, any more to add to that?
Yes, so for us in Switzerland is a really small company. So for us, programmatic advertising was a door opener to the whole world. We were able to not only get Swiss customers and Swiss agencies, we got a lot of international campaigns that we didn't get before. So yeah, this is actually a very good opportunity for us to do more international revenue. And if we have a look back in Switzerland, we started programmatic like 6 or 7 years ago. We sell now at Media or at Goldbach 25% only through programmatic. If you have the slides in mind that we saw at the beginning, the programmatic share in Europe is 75%. So yeah, there is still some work to do for us, but we see a big opportunity also with Programmatic Guaranteed, and yeah, also the open marketplace and private marketplace.
Great, so some work to do and some regional variations as well there across Europe particularly. Great. Yeah. Okay, great. So we all know that there's huge consumer demand for quality content. And I'd like to ask the question, sort of, what are the key factors and the key challenges that publishers face monetizing their quality content in the programmatic world? So Elsa, perhaps from Telegraph, a producer of high-quality content, perhaps you could offer your view.
Yeah, so I think there are a couple of different challenges facing premium publishers and all publishers, I suppose, in the programmatic world. And personally, from what we found, they range from brand safety through to commercialization above the cookie, through to transparency, and then all the way down to real metrics that matter, aside from the baseline click-through rate percentage, which so inherently favor the platforms out there as opposed to publishers or premium publishers. I think something that we've seen more specifically over the last year or so has been this approach, this blanket approach to brand safety, which are hygiene factors put in place to, I guess, really police the long tail or the darker side of the web without any real, I guess, strategies or differing strategies put in place for the premium publishers out there. So yeah, that's something that we're definitely noticing at the Telegraph.
Because as I guess consumers consume in a variety of different media types, there are those sort of more fringe elements of the publishing landscape which are potentially even creep into being competitors with you in that case. Great. Vignesh, perhaps I could get your opinion.
I think I'm just going to go a couple of more steps back in the sense that I feel like, one, there is actually complete lack of transparency into what advertiser goals are for the publisher, which actually does not drive the right results. Number two, the advertiser has no visibility into what segments and what content actually work well for the advertiser. So there is that lack of visibility into what they're doing. And obviously, the third one is going to be the fact that the middlemen, the vendors and the tech companies in the entire supply chain end up cannibalizing the working media dollars, which could have actually gone to the publisher and resulted in much better ROI for the publisher. And coupled to this, you add ad fraud. I think these are fundamental challenges, I think, which plague the industry. Yeah.
Absolutely, and I think that we've got a couple of more specific questions on the challenges later on, especially with regarding ad fraud, which is obviously a big issue and has become big news among the industry recently as well. And lastly, Emmanuel, is there additional points that you'd like to cover on that?
Yeah, definitely. I think in terms of the challenges, while we appreciate from a broadcaster perspective, those barriers have been, you could say, drawn down, somewhat. When it comes to all buyers having access to their inventory, some of those challenges lie around, especially within the UK, like Clearcast, the clearing body for ads, ensuring there's a clock number associated to every creative, the broadcaster having to approve every creative, hence why they can't work across the open marketplace. Even, with that, you still end up within, you have a mechanism where the actual creatives have to be pre-ingested onto the broadcaster side prior to actually being displayed to the user for obvious reasons, because they don't want to hamper their content. And then you also have to take into consideration for any particular campaign, there may be 1 to, let's say, 3 creatives. What happens if a broadcaster has accepted 1 or approved 1, and then there's another 2 or 3 that haven't actually been approved? So you end up with another challenge in that respect. And then finally, you also have to think about clash management. Within the broadcaster world, for instance, they can't serve a Pepsi ad right after a Coca-Cola ad. So those are quite simple, but yeah, that's the world they live in. So that's also another challenge for them.
So a load of restrictions that are layered on top of an already complex ecosystem, really.
Yeah, exactly.
Perfect. Yeah, great. Thank you. So changing the conversation towards user-generated content, I'd like to ask, how do content publishers really stand out? So perhaps, Jericho, we could go to you first.
Yes, so I can give you an example of 20 Minutes. 20 Minutes is the biggest news platform in Switzerland. 20 Minutes is for free, so everybody can read news on 20 Minutes. And we finance 20 Minutes with advertising. So agencies love to advertise with us or with 20 Minutes because it's real journalism. So there is quality on the website. And yeah, agencies and clients can be sure that they're not running on a page where a video is shown, for example, of, maybe with terroristic content. And so it's a brand safe environment because, in the wild west of the internet, sometimes customers don't know where they really run. So.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. And I think, with user-generated content, obviously, by its very nature, there's a limited set of parameters that you can put around it. Emmanuel, is that something that falls into your world?
Yeah, it does to a degree. And, I won't call out, particular publishers specifically, but, in terms of how they stand out, what I've seen over, let's say, the last, 18 months or so is that they've actually started to work with, perhaps 2 OBPs that actually have, content libraries behind them in order to complement, some of the articles and the work that goes across their site. I think that's one way to obviously enrich and enhance the amount of requests they can obviously send to buyers, especially in terms of the segments that they have access to. But in addition to that, they're actually complementing their whole site with additional feeds from various libraries. I think that's quite a good way for them to increase activity.
Yeah, I was just going to add to that as well. I think there's a big difference between quality journalism or journalism in itself compared to user-generated content. Journalism, especially the investigative kind or the lobbying kind, which we at the Telegraph have really, pioneered a lot of amazing initiatives over the last year from women in sport and women in business and loads of other initiatives. I think we have to be careful to differentiate between content that has been harvested for scale, essentially, versus journalism that has been created for and written for readers with value and trust attached to that. And we're moderated, in a in a really effective way within that industry. And so I think for me, that's where brands can get that association from. And there is a real big difference between quality journalism and user-generated content.
It makes a lot of sense to make that distinction, absolutely. So let's talk about current and immediate concerns in the publishing ecosystem. So would you consider to be one of the #1 threats facing programmatic today? And if I can ask you to sort of turn it into a bit of action as well, how do you see the industry responding and overcoming those threats? So Shimon, perhaps I could start with you.
Sure. So basically, there was a lot of discussion today about privacy, about data, about third-party cookies. So it's a natural answer. But my perspective is a little different. In my perspective, in programmatic, one of the main issues is the level of dependency on third-party, either organizations or bodies like governments and private companies. Because when you have publishers, again, I'm talking about big premium publishers, but also the middle ones. And one or two decisions from companies like Google or from EU can shut down your business. This is difficult, and also the level of discussion that they can take to those bodies is limited. And again, one short example: I was here in London not longer than 2 months ago at Google office. We held a small event for publishers. And we talked with one quite big publisher from UK. It was a parenting forum. And a yield manager from this publisher approached us and asked us if we know about any changes around May, because the programmatic revenue shrank down by 30 or 40%. And it was not thousands of pounds, it was rather £1 million. And they couldn't get answer from Google why it happened. Did they just get really broad answer that it was because they were probably flagged as potentially not brand safety content. And it's a forum about children. So we have a lot of situations when pages are blocked because word of penis or something is appearing on it. So it's difficult to work when someone is throwing you rocks under your feet, and you're not focusing on basically improving quality of your inventory or implementing new products. You have to get compliant with GDPR, with third-party cookie, with Google first price auction model. We have to work on that, and the other companies are basically influencing your business and the way it follows.
Okay, so what would be the solution for that? Would that be things like being able to put frameworks in from industry bodies? Would that help?
Yeah, so for me, what IAB is doing is one of the solutions, but the other solution is basically what, for example, happens now in Germany as the answer on a cookie matter, on the GDPR matter, when basically companies from the markets start to combine forces and work together to find a solution other than the top walled garden solutions.
Okay, makes a lot of sense. Vignesh, from platform side, what's the top threat? I'm sure there are many on the list.
Yeah, I think the list can go on forever, but I think if you look at it fundamentally, I think there is the fact that there is misalignment in terms of incentives for different stakeholders in the ecosystem, where be the advertiser, the players in the vendor players, as well as the publisher. The fact that there are misaligned incentives which actually promote bad behavior and then leads to lack of transparency. So in the end, the advertiser has no way of calculating an ROI and trying to figure out which partner actually adds value and which partner is not adding value. I believe that is one of the biggest challenges that we see in the ecosystem.
Absolutely. So sort of unpicking the value chain there. Absolutely. And Elsa, does that resonate with you?
Yeah, definitely. I think the other key thing that I think we as an industry have done in the past is sell advertising space and not our journalism. Yeah. There are a record number of people reading news and supporting journalism. And journalism matters now more so than ever. So why are we not seeing money flowing our way? I read a really interesting article last week from Tracy DeGroos over at Newsworks, and she pointed it out in a really simple way in the fact that the digital, advertising ecosystem is just completely broken. It is dominated by an open marketplace which sells content as this one amorphous mass, without any real sort of. I guess the word is without any real expertise put into the distinction between the attention of the quality of the context or even of the audience. And she said in her article last week that actually advertisers are finding themselves in this bonkers situation at the moment where some of them don't even know where their ads are appearing or if they're even being seen by human eyes. And that ultimately adds to distrust in our overall ecosystem. So I think advertisers, regulators and politicians are starting to wake up to that now, but it is pretty slow going.
Absolutely. I think the fact that I think we, for a long time, I think there have been, these conversations have been going on for a long time. But I think the fact that we as a body need to come together to figure out what the solution is, supply chain is definitely broken. Incidentally, MediaMath has also recently launched an initiative called The Source, where we are building a completely transparent and accountable supply chain, where we're working with the stakeholders, the publishers, the SSP partners, and the advertisers to ensure that this supply chain is driven to deliver advertiser outcomes. And the publisher, the advertiser gets complete transparency into the complete supply chain in terms of costs, making sure that the audience that they're reaching is actually real, and the fact that the publisher benefits because he's currently seeing a rise in terms of his revenue. So I hope this initiative will something that we'll be able to build in these markets as well.
Absolutely. So, I think taking your point about that the ecosystem is potentially broken in many places, we're still seeing technology and platforms evolving at a hugely rapidly increasing rate. So I wanted to ask sort of how can publishers better understand what to use and what not to use to be able to drive their business forward? Emmanuel, perhaps we could start with you.
First of all, a publisher definitely needs to have a CMP. It's quite, we may laugh, but even 18 months on after GDPR, you'll be surprised at the amount of publishers that don't actually have a CMP in place, and it makes things quite difficult for vendors like ourselves to obviously work with them. Yes, if they promote global inventory, yes, there is another revenue arm, but within Europe, it's crucial. Secondly, I would also advise, in terms of tech for publishers to use, a third-party verification provider of some sort within the chain. From our perspective, it's the publisher's job to ensure that their inventory is clean. We appreciate, when you look at, let's say tier 2s and tier 3 publishers, they utilize various means to enhance the amount of traffic that comes through to their site, which we understand and totally get. And we also appreciate that the cost of a third-party verification provider can be quite, substantial. However, if that's the case, my personal, view and suggestion would be that they work with a vendor, i.e. an ad server, that can potentially give them those, that element of functionality from a pre-bid and a post-bid, analysis perspective, which will then, clean up that supply chain prior to actually reaching, buyers and advertisers and agencies.
Yeah, makes sense. And on the theme of cleaning up and brand safety, there's a lot of buzz in the industry about context in general. In your opinion, what role does contextual intelligence play in a brand safety conversation? Elsa?
I guess keywords in themselves aren't isn't the perfect solution in a contextual sort of world. And I guess at the Telegraph we've been trying to identify and push through with solutions of a contextual 2.0 technology that fits not only our own advertising but also the brands and agencies that we work with. So that, I guess, is moving away from keyword statistical technology and more of a move to semantic technology, moving away from brand safety and more to brand suitability. So that's what we've been trying to do and will continue to do over the next few months or so.
Yeah, I love evolving the conversation to be more of a suitability and not a one-size-fits-all in this case. Vignesh, is that similar in the platform world?
I think so, yeah. I mean, I think context is becoming increasingly important, but I think context intelligence should actually go in much deeper rather than just focus on not brand safe content, but it's actually focus more on recommending what kind of where the audiences are actually going in and how can that be actually reflected in terms of an ROI driven brand safe environment for advertisers to actually advertise on. I think that's actually important, yeah.
Absolutely. Great. So we've talked a lot about the challenges for publishers here, and I think that what I want to finish with is a little bit of future gazing and looking a bit further out. So what projects are you working on that excite you about the future? And if I give you just a couple of sentences from each of you about what you're looking forward to in 2020, that'd be great. Should we start this way?
Yeah, I think for me is, I guess, just repeating what I said earlier around contextual 2.0, but it's really furthering that discussion and that strategy and that solution for us at the Telegraph, especially as we've heard from the earlier sessions around the monetization beyond the cookie that's going to become more and more important. So it's really about, for us, setting up a really incredible product for our brands, our agencies, and for our internal teams to use as we progress forward into 2020.
Great.
For MediaMath, I think the focus is going to be working with industry stakeholders, right, from advertisers, publishers, SSP partners, to actually provide the solution, the source project, where we are actually providing complete, transparent supply chain. I think that's going to be the focus for us next year, and then scaling this out in international markets, especially UK being the one. So hopefully we'll go work with the Telegraph also on this.
Perfect, great.
So for us, as this programmatic market is going a little into the advertiser market side, we want to take back a little control for publishers, and we're developing solutions to a little cross-engineer the bid trading algorithm and allow publishers to still maintain the proper pricing of their inventory, even with the first price auction model, plus give them a little more time to educate themselves and to stay updated on all the changes in industry, because we've talked about it. You can dedicate half daily time to just learn about all the things that's going on and still have to work on the heavy lifting, setting campaigns, taking care about blockings and everything else. So we want to make it easier for publishers.
Great, perfect. Emmanuel, what's on your wish list?
For us, it's programmatic guaranteed, which we're already working on. The core objective there is to make it a seamless process for buyers to truly transact with broadcasters, and explicitly show that the world of programmatic has evolved quite extensively. In addition to that, we are also developing tech around blockchain as we move into this world of or cookieless world that essentially uses a block graph, so buyers can actually target particular audiences in a safe and an efficient manner without data leakage.
Great.
Yeah, for us, we heard it a lot today. It's the cookieless future, or the end of the cookie. When we have a look into our inventory now, we see 50% of all inventory coming from users without a cookie. So that's a big challenge that we have to tackle next year. And yeah, I think we have to dig deep into what is happening on DSP side. We have to learn that as publishers, like really deep. And then we have to
support.
Adapt. Nice. Yeah, that's great for next year.
Perfect, thank you. So I'd like to thank our panelists for their insight today, and hopefully this gave you some food for thought about the challenges and opportunities that publishers have in programmatic. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Again, an exceptional panel that we slightly run out of time for as time marches on. But we're on to our final panel, and I'll remind everyone of two very important things. This will be available to replay, so any of the content that you missed that you want to see more or re-go over is going to be available on the IAB YouTube channel. But it gives me great pleasure to welcome Anne Goodman to the stage, who's going to lead a really heavyweight panel about how to, intellectually heavyweight panel to be clear, about how to rebuild trust in advertising through transparency. Anne.
Thank you. Thank you, Simon. This is actually quite a contrast. I just spent the weekend up in the Lake District presenting mountain films about mountaineering. And the last film I introduced was about a winter ascent of K2, which has never been climbed in the winter. You can imagine how extreme that was. So this is quite a contrast. So trust and the lack of it is pervasive in our lives. It's been significant in governance recently, and it also penetrates much of our personal lives, particularly when we talk about data. And it's not new. Over 20 years ago, a 20th century icon of peace said the following: lack of transparency results in distrust and a deep sense of insecurity. Who'd have thought the Dalai Lama would have such an insight on the advertising supply chain? So it gives me great pleasure to bring up to the stage my perfectly formed panel. If you'd like to come and join us now and introduce yourselves. The panel represents three, take those, that looks great. The panel represents three significant parts of the advertising supply chain: publisher, ad tech, and agency. So if you'd like to go ahead and introduce yourselves, and we'll kick off.
Hi, I'm Stevan. Some people actually in the industry know me as Stevan Group M, just because my last name is a bit complicated to pronounce. But Stevan Angelovic, I work for Group M as brand safety manager. Part of my job is to take care of the risk, policy, and governance across contextual brand safety, viewability, fraud, privacy, and user experience. So all those areas in which transparency and trust are actually crucial for us and users.
Hello, Stefan Hannuser, ProSiebenSat.1, a German media group covering entertainment, ad tech, and also e-commerce. But today I'm supposed just to represent the publisher perspective.
And Thomas Dumont, I'm a Senior Associate General Counsel at Zender, formerly known as AppNexus. And I handle all the legal stuff in Europe.
Great, thank you. Really good to have your time here. And I think we've got some really, it's such a big challenge, the whole area of transparency. Obviously, we've been talking about it for many years. But I think in the first instance, what actually is transparency in digital advertising? What are we talking about here? And perhaps if you want to just reflect on that in the context of each of your areas of business, that would be really helpful. So shall we kick off with the middle, Stefan? Stefan, sorry.
You have Stefan and Stefan.
Could also be Stephen. So it's fine.
We're going to be practicing. Yes, we're going to spend the whole panel with me practicing now, aren't we?
Right, international name. So, yeah,
do you want to hold it a bit closer? Just
from a publisher's point of view. What is transparency? It's openness. It's simply defining and making some potential conflicts of interest and the underlying economic context transparent to the different stakeholders. And from a publisher's point of view, the most important stakeholder is, of course, the viewer, the reader, the user, however you call our audience. So those who go to our inventory and catch up entertainment, information, education, and whatever content you're providing to the public. And in terms of data privacy, data protection, TCF and all those topics we are going to discuss today, this is the consumers' trust based on transparency, on our openness, how the whole ecosystem functions, who pays for the content, why we need certain data to have this paid, to have ad-sponsored content, is key to us. So therefore, in line with all these efforts under GDPR, e-privacy, and the solutions, industry solutions like TCF, for us, users, viewers, readers, trust based on openness, transparency, and also education is key.
Thank you. That's pretty much covered it all, hasn't it, really?
From all point of view, but with different aspects and different
Tomo.
players.
Yeah, I mean, for Zender, transparency is many things, but it's, most importantly, I think it's really tech fee transparency. It's many things that at least, it's whatever our customers are going to care about. And often it's the tech fees that we charge. So for the buyers, that makes sense because, they just want to know where their money is going and whether it's in fact supporting a dynamic industry. And it's also a way for them to take like informed decisions as to what they're going to do with their media dollars. And for sellers, to Stefan's point, like I think it's about making sure, so publishers, making sure that they have the right information, the information they need to actually trust the system and how it works. And so yeah, transparency is very much about how much we charge us at tech players.
I mean, I can add something. So in the context of media agencies, I mean, in the context of my work, what transparency for us within the area of brand safety is to know where ads have been delivered and to be able to measure that and independently verify that the ad has been delivered in an appropriate environment, viewable, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But so that is, in my context, the essence of transparency. However, what we as the industry, these are all very interesting points, but we as the industry, we often forget the user and our transparency to a user, and that trust-building exercise with users, especially in the context of data processing. And I think these two are interlinked, but it should not be conflated.
So what are we doing about this? What's been, we have certainly made strides. I know we've been talking about it for a long time, but there's no doubt about it, we're making strides. So what can we call out that the industry is doing collectively to make a difference here to help transparency? You individually talked about your own areas, but collectively as an industry, where are we making some real difference, do you think?
Shall I? Well, there are quite a few of initiatives. I think, for example, in the area of ad fraud, you have ads.txt, which allows publishers to be transparent about who is allowed to sell and resell their inventory. Then you have lots of work within JICWebs in the UK or MRC in the States of defining different standards and then certifying companies that are actually adhering to those standards. And then in Europe, I think probably the most relevant and pertinent framework that we are currently building, that we have actually built, is the TCF Transparency and Consent Framework, which should help both the user transparency but also the industry transparency. So yes, we have something to brag about as the industry, despite some shortfalls.
Everybody's familiar with it in the room? Using it?
TCF.
TCF, that is, yes. Excellent, good.
Yes, TCF is definitely a solution, but I think our efforts go far beyond this. So it's a complex industry, it's a complex ecosystem, and I think what's important, and whenever you start discussing this with whoever, so with the lawmakers in Brussels, or in our case in Berlin, or with NGOs, or even with the users. So if they approach you individually, since of course you have a social life, and from time to time you are asked exactly what you do and what your company does and what you're doing at your company. So it's an educational thing or educated effort and an educated task, challenge, to simply explain the economic interdependencies between content, good content, quality content, in terms of entertainment, information, and education, and the who pays for it, how this is all paid, how the interaction is between different edtech players who try or help you deliver the best or the most relevant ads to the right people, to the right users. So explaining it, and also the economic and also the technical aspects, and sometimes you're really surprised that those dealing with these topics day to day, also in Brussels, for instance, they even don't know the technical background. So what's a cookie? Sometimes you're even asked a break also after 1 hour's discussion about privacy and so on. So could you just briefly explain what a cookie is, how does it work, and so on. So what we do now is start with education, and based on education then follows openness and transparency. So without education and understanding, there is no transparency.
Okay, so some good industry initiatives you both mentioned, but you're also talking about the whole education piece and the continual communication out to the bodies who are regulating the environment.
Yep.
Thomas, do you want to add anything to this?
There's many initiatives across Europe, and by the way, I think there is perhaps a need for a more coordinated approach. But I'm, being French, I'm actually going to talk about a French initiative. And so in France, some of you may know that there is the Loi Sapin, which has been, around for almost 30 years. And there's been an update to it, and it's around transparency in the advertising industry, amongst other things. And it got an update in 2017, specifically to address the transparency issues in the ad tech industry. So, it forced the industry, similar to what happened with the GDPR, where everybody had to work together since we are so interconnected. The industry, came together, started thinking about how we could solve or at least address some of the requirements contained in the new updated law. And we as an industry came up with Trust ID, which I think, again, I'm probably not going to go into details as to what it means, but it's basically a way to track so advertisers are going to be able to track how much money they spend on specific publishers' sites, which is going to allow them to eventually talk to each other and see what's taken in the middle. So it's a French initiative at this point, but they're thinking about updating the OpenRTB protocol. So that's, with Tech Lab in the US at the moment. Of course, it's not a priority because it only applies in France. But if the UK were willing to actually start, leveraging that solution, that could be interesting.
So you've all touched on regulation in the context of GDPR, for example. So has regulation, regulation has stepped in because regulation does when the industry itself doesn't sort its issues out. So is regulation helping? How is it helping? Has it helped? It's drawn attention to things, but is it helping or is it a distraction? Are we able to get ahead of regulation? How do we manage that constructively? I don't mind who takes that.
Can I start?
Yeah.
I actually feel, so, being a lawyer, I love a good regulation, just like job security. But it's also, I think it helps to a certain extent because that forces the industry to start thinking about these issues and start, work together. Like they end up working together, all those players, and they set aside all the different commercial interests at play because there is a bigger picture and we need to fix or to address or to, get closer to compliance. So that helps. But often, I must say, since, our industry is very complex and there's a lot of nuances, sometimes it's difficult because regulators and legislators are actually not necessarily equipped to draft a law that clearly addresses the issue.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, maybe there's one aspect. So it's not regular. You mentioned regulation, yes, but there are some places or some aspects where self-regulation or co-regulation is still possible. So it's not the regulator taking all decisions. So of course, GDPR is not all about targeted advertising. So sometimes you get this impression, but this is wrong. So it's not just us who triggered GDPR or e-privacy. So no, there's an option for co-regulation. I wouldn't say self-regulation, since of course whatever code of conduct or whatever you develop, there's always an authority looking at this. So it's not self-regulation, but co-regulation in dialogue with the authorities. where there are still some spaces where you can take decision, where you can make our business safer, also more reliable. So I think regulation, yes, but we also have to see that this is sometimes just a framework where we have some space for maneuvering, where we can define our own targets, where we find our own rules to a certain extent in a dialogue with the authorities, and this might be the next step.
I just wanted to say, many people are misled to believe that data protection did not exist before the GDPR. And as a matter of fact, it did. We had the regulation I hope all of our companies did comply at the time. What the GDPR did, it brought extra awareness, and it made us all button up our data protection efforts. Now, I agree with Stefan, co-regulation, or I don't even know if that's how you call it, co-regulation. Regulation can be is positive and can be beneficial when they give us a nice principle and very firm principle, reliable principle to work on. And then you build on it. And what we try to do with the TCF is actually we took the GDPR and all those principles, and we tried coming together as the industry to build that extra layer on top of the regulation, which is often just interpretation of the law. So as the industry, we took a certain way to interpret the law in the best possible possible faith to make the industry more compliant and to actually meet those GDPR requirements, some of which actually existed even before.
I mean, that's the issue, isn't it? It's the complexity of the regulation that you're trying to overlay onto and the lack of understanding. But we're also in a very, we're in a highly complex industry for certain, and that supply chain is really difficult to understand. So therefore, is transparency actually achievable? I mean, how is it? Can we achieve full transparency? Is it possible? Is it given where we are?
We have no choice. So in the end, we have no choice for two reasons. So So the first GDPR, so of course you have to be, there are clear transparency requirements under GDPR. So if you look at the privacy notice, you have to demonstrate who receives data or who collects data from a publisher's perspective on your inventory. It's a simple legal requirement. And most recently, we had this European Court of Justice decision in the Fashion ID, which says that both publishers and those who are enabled by publishers to collect data on publishers' inventory are co-controllers. So you better know as a publisher who collects data on your inventory, on your websites, on your apps, and so on. Since you are simply co-controllers, you're both liable and responsible for complying with GDPR. So it's a joint liability, it's a joint effort. And therefore, I think it's very simple that transparency, full transparency from a publisher's perspective is key, and this is what we are working on.
Okay, so it's totally achievable. Which
it is.
Either.
No, I just want to say, yes, I think we all strive for transparency, but transparency has many nuances. Exactly. So the GDPR, when it came into force, and it's supposed to raise awareness. It's supposed to make people aware of what is happening with their data, and they're supposed to exercise their choices. What it's not supposed to do is numb people into just clicking yes, 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 and move on. So people, there are different levels of transparency. And I think we as the industry, the greatest battlefield that we have now is being sufficiently transparent to users, while walking that thin line of good user experience and not drenching them in information that is just going to numb them at the end of the day. So I think user experience designers are definitely must-have for companies designing CMPs and different solutions addressing that consumer transparency element.
Yeah, very well said. I think that's a really important point. Tommy, did you want to add to that?
No, I was just going to say that Well, when you ask the question whether transparency is achievable in our industry, it's like asking whether GDPR compliance is achievable. Yes, just like a lot of work, and we have to work together to make it happen.
It's just the reason I asked it is just that for transparency, sometimes to trust somebody, you don't need to have always to be completely transparent. And don't forget we're talking about this in the context of trust. You don't. It's if it's where things have broken down and there's been a lack of understanding, that there is a heightened awareness of a need for transparency. But once you've rebuilt the levels of trust, you don't need to. Quite often, I trust you to do this. You're the surgeon. I don't need to know how you're going to do every aspect of my operation. I trust you because you've got the case studies that demonstrate you can do this. So I think that's what I'm talking about. I actually think
that we don't need...
But I think that's the point that you were trying, making about getting the balance right.
We wouldn't need transparency if there wasn't a trust issue. Transparency is just a means to rebuild that trust that's gone, if it ever existed. But there's plenty of industries where transparency is not necessarily required. No one really cares. I don't know, like my bank, for example. I don't really care what they do with. I personally.
I care.
Well, I know, so long as it's still in the bank account, But yeah, I think our industry has to be more transparent because there is no trust, and there's been bad players, bad things happening. Yeah. We need to.
No, I agree. So we touched on the TCF, which has been, tremendous initiative to try and we, talked about the opportunity to bring the industry together and the TCF and what the work it was doing in the context of GDPR. So GDPR hasn't necessarily changed, but we've already gone into TCF v 2.0. So why have we moved into this next version of the TCF?
Shall I?
Yes.
Well, when did we launch the TCF V1? I think it was April 2018. It seems ages ago for me, because since then we have undertaken, I think, a massive effort, consulting different stakeholders. Actually, primarily publishers. I believe publishers were the driving force behind a lot of TCF V2 changes. Then there were lots of discussions with different data protection authorities across Europe, and obviously all companies that actually implemented V1 came with certain changes they wanted to see, or adaptations, etc. So all that feedback fed into V2, which is, I believe, a much better version, buttoned up and stronger framework for the industry. And I think you will see quite a lot of players now either coming to the table and being engaged more with the TCF, thanks to those changes that we have created. We opened, made the process more transparent, built trust, and as a result of that, we have the V2.
Did you want to?
I wouldn't call the version 2 the publisher version, since it's quite balanced. So with all the different interests, but it definitely takes takes account of publishers' legal requirement to manage the whole supply chain, since of course publishers are the face to the users. Publishers are, from a GDPR, e-privacy, whatnot perspective, responsible, first point of contact for authorities, and therefore it's important that publishers can control who tracks, who collects data on their websites, under which legal basis, and for what purposes, so that publishers are empowered again to be the gatekeeper for data collection on their inventory. This is what we achieved with version 2.0, and this is, of course, why we are supporting it.
Nothing more to add, except that to get there, we actually met with, I think, more than 10 data protection authorities. We also had a period of public comment, like for players in local markets to actually provide their feedback. So hopefully the entire ecosystem actually ended up contributing to this version 2.
Yeah, and I think that's the important point, isn't it, for TCF 2.0, is that it was developed not because we had to, but because we were trying to move ahead and stay ahead of the regulation and be proactive as an industry to move things forward, to ensure that we had a better product that was going to work from a broader and a long, broader cross-section of the ecosystem. So I think that's a really important area. So I know we've been running a little late, so I'm just going to try and wrap up now with one final question, which is around what do we want, we've talked a little bit about the TCF. We want the industry to get behind the TCF. I think that goes without saying. But are there any other initiatives you think or things that you think the industry should be doing collectively? You've talked a lot about the sort of co-location, about collectively getting behind to work together to try and rebuild this trust piece that we have lost or eroded.
I already mentioned Trust ID, but I'm going to say it again. Trust ID, I think, would be a powerful tool. So get behind the French, if you can. But I think in general, there's a need for, I don't know if it's, there's a need for a European-wide conversation on the topic, and eventually a global one. And I don't know right now who should be owning that conversation, yeah. We as Zender at least will always support any initiative, but there isn't we need to have everybody around the table and really bring the issues and make sure we address them using the existing protocols.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, as I mentioned, so I think the foundation for trust and for transparency is understanding and education. So there's an educational part to explain how this ecosystem works for those interested. Of course, there are some which are not interested in this at all. Are those who go into the details and to want to better understand, to make this transparent, to educate about how things work. Also, those decision takers on whatever level, and also maybe a bit of data ethics, so a general understanding what the user has to contribute in terms of his or her data, what we have to offer for which safeguards we have to offer, so that we have some sort of contract. So if this is ad sponsored, then everybody has to make some contribution. The user buy his or her data, we with safeguards and clear rules of how data are being processed. Also the enforcement and so, which is part of the TCF. The TCF is not a technical standard, it's a compliance standard. It will have enforcement and compliance measures. So to have this contract, users, industry and so on, you give data, we use these data for certain purposes in a transparent manner with safeguards, with TCF as a governance and compliance framework around it, and make this understandable.
So the important point from your perspective, though, I think the one that you brought at the beginning is the education piece, is everybody getting behind, if they have an opportunity to educate and talk about it, the industry as a whole, getting behind that is crucial.
For me, two things. One is full acceptance of third-party verification. So third-party verification is absolute bedrock, cornerstone of transparency, of media delivery, and we don't have it fully adopted across all media channels for different reasons. So I think that's something that we as industry should be working more towards. And the second initiative that I believe we at GroupM actually believe is very important is Global Alliance for Responsible Media, which was launched this year in June and brings some of the largest world's advertisers, agencies, tech providers to work together on more sustainable and better media, not only in terms of brand safety, but also to users themselves.
Thank you. I think that's been a very valuable insight. It's an incredibly broad topic, and to hone in on some of the key elements to this has been. It's been really interesting to hear your voices from those different areas of the ecosystem. So I think it's been very valuable. Thank you. Thank you to my panel.
So I think that was an incredible panel, and that ends the panels for today. There are some networking drinks available for those in the room. I think they're just outside that door. I'm slightly power played by these photos here. They're genuinely intimidating, and I think I'm going to confess to all my crimes right now. But look at this. It's like an episode of Suits behind me right now. But genuinely, thank you to all the speakers today. A lot of time, energy, and effort goes in. I'd like to thank the film crew at Verizon who've run and hosted the live stream for us, IAB Europe for hosting, organising, promoting, and every single panelist, and we'll do lots of thank yous later. But please do also share the content, make sure as many people as possible view it and encourage people to view it. I think it's a really good industry education, really to Anne's point, that we as a group need to do much more to educate the whole industry and even consumers. So with that, thank you very much and good night.